She pulled into the lot at 1:47 in the morning, tires screaming against dry Arizona asphalt. And the first thing Grant Calloway noticed wasn't the dying engine, wasn't the cracked windshield held together by what looked like packing tape and a prayer. It was her eyes, wide, scanning the darkness behind her like something was still out there, like whatever she'd been running from hadn't stopped running just because she had. He'd seen desperate people before, but this was different. This woman wasn't just tired, she was hunted. If you want to know how one terrified stranger changed a billionaire's entire life, stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The cafe didn't have a name on any map that mattered. It sat at mile marker 74 on a state highway that most GPS systems hadn't bothered to update since 2019, wedged between a shuttered gas station and about 40 miles of nothing in either direction. The sign out front, Desert Mile Cafe, had lost its second E sometime during the previous winter, and nobody had gotten around to replacing it. The neon in the window still buzzed and flickered in the old pink and blue pattern that Grant's night manager, Felix, said reminded him of a Las Vegas casino that had given up on itself. Grant had told him that was exactly the point. He owned the place. Nobody knew that. Not Felix, who ran the overnight shift with quiet efficiency and a rotation of 3 employees who all seemed to be saving up for something they never talked about. Not the regulars, who were mostly truckers, insomniacs, and the occasional college kid driving cross-country on bad decisions. Not the handful of people in Grant's professional orbit who would have found the whole arrangement deeply confusing. A man worth somewhere north of $400 million spending his Thursday nights behind a counter, refilling coffee cups and wiping down laminate tables, going by nothing more than his first name. It had started 3 years ago as an investment. A tax thing, honestly. His accountant had suggested it, some structure involving depreciation and commercial property that Grant had stopped listening to about 4 minutes into the explanation. He'd signed the paperwork, written the check, and forgotten about it for almost 8 months. Then one night, after a charity gala in Scottsdale that had left him feeling hollowed out in a way he couldn't articulate to anyone, he'd driven past the highway exit on his way back to his house in Paradise Valley and on impulse turned off. He'd walked in, sat at the counter, ordered black coffee, and stayed for 4 hours. He'd come back the following week, and the week after that. At some point, he couldn't tell you exactly when, the place had become the only thing in his life that felt real. Grant Calloway's public biography, the version that appeared in Forbes and Arizona Business Journal, and the occasional profile piece in publications that liked to photograph successful men standing in front of their buildings, went something like this. Phoenix native. Studied computer engineering at ASU, dropped out junior year. Founded a logistics software company at 24 in the spare bedroom of a rental house he shared with 2 other people. Sold it at 28 for $62 million. Took 18 months off. Came back with a new company, infrastructure technology, the kind of back-end architecture that made supply chains run faster and warehouses talk to each other, and proceeded to build something that analysts couldn't stop writing about. $430 million at last valuation, though that number shifted depending on the quarter. The biography always ended there, or with something vague about philanthropy. It never mentioned Sophie. Sophie was 7 years old, had her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw, and was currently, at 11:30 on a Thursday night, asleep in her bedroom in a house that Grant had bought for its backyard and its quiet neighborhood and its proximity to a school with a good second-grade teacher. She was being watched by their housekeeper, Mrs. Reyes, a 61-year-old woman from Tucson, who had been with them since Sophie was 14 months old, and who treated the arrangement with the seriousness of a second career. Sophie's mother, Diane, had left when Sophie was 11 months old. Not dramatically. There hadn't been a fight or a confrontation or any of the scenes that Grant had sometimes imagined afterward when his brain couldn't stop trying to make sense of it. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, taken 2 suitcases, and been on a flight to Portland by the time he'd found it. The note said she was sorry. It said she wasn't built for this. This being, as far as Grant could ever determine, motherhood and domesticity, and the particular suffocating weight of being married to someone whose work lived inside their head at 3 in the morning. He'd never blamed her exactly, but he'd never quite stopped being angry either. and he'd learned over years of expensive therapy to recognize that those two things could exist at the same time without canceling each other out. So it was him and Sophie. Had been for 6 years. The nannies and the housekeeper and the good school in the backyard. All of it assembled around the central fact of his daughter, who was currently going through a phase where she insisted on wearing mismatched socks and refused to eat anything orange, which made dinner time an ongoing negotiation. He loved her in the specific, almost frightening way that he suspected all single parents loved their children. Like the love had nowhere else to go, so it just kept compressing and intensifying until it was almost indistinguishable from fear. On the night Lena Brooks pulled into the parking lot, Grant was doing something he rarely admitted to doing. Nothing. He was sitting at the end of the counter with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago, reading a novel he'd been carrying around for 3 months and had gotten 60 pages into. Felix was in the back doing inventory. There were 2 other customers, a trucker named Raymond who came through every couple of weeks and always ordered the same thing, and a young woman who'd been nursing a slice of apple pie and staring at her phone with the expression of someone receiving bad news in slow motion. The highway outside was dark and mostly quiet. Occasionally a semi would pass and the windows would shudder slightly in its wake. The neon sign hummed its persistent hum. Grant had turned a page and was not retaining a single word of it when he heard the tires. Not just the sound of a car pulling in. Something harder than that. A screech, like the driver had braked too fast or too late, coming from somewhere out of proportion to the parking lot's 20-odd spaces. He looked up automatically. Through the window he watched a sedan, a Nissan, maybe a decade old, one tail light visibly dimmer than the other, cut into the lot at an angle that suggested the driver had turned without quite deciding to turn, like the decision had been made by the body before the mind caught up. The car sat for a moment after it stopped. Engine running, nobody getting out. Grant set down his book. He watched the car for what was probably 30 seconds, but felt longer. Then the driver's door opened. She got out slowly, like she was checking the ground before committing her weight to it. She was wearing jeans and a gray jacket that was a little too big, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly come undone. She stood beside the car for a second, one hand still on the door handle, and looked back down the highway. Looked hard, in both directions. Then she closed the door and walked toward the entrance. Grant had the counter between him and the door, which meant he was watching her face when she came in. She was probably 30, give or take. Brown eyes, tired in the deep way that sleep couldn't fix. A small cut on her lower lip that was maybe a day old. She scanned the room before she did anything else, clocked Raymond at his booth, the girl with the pie, Felix's absence, and Grant recognized that particular kind of assessment. He'd seen it in people who'd learned to be careful. She made her way to the counter and sat down 2 stools away from him, keeping her jacket on. "Coffee?" he said. She looked at him like she was deciding something. "Please?" He got up, poured it, set it in front of her. She wrapped both hands around the mug immediately, even though it was probably 72 degrees in the cafe, and stared at the surface of the coffee. "Long drive?" Grant said. "Yeah." He let it sit, went back to his book, or at least the pretense of it, gave her the space that the silence offered. It was a few minutes before she spoke again. "My car's been making a sound." She said it like she was confessing something. Like a grinding sound, started about 20 miles back and got worse. Grant looked up. "What kind of grinding? Is it when you brake or when I'm just driving?" "Lower kind of, like metal on metal somewhere underneath." "Could be a bearing. Maybe the CV axle." He paused. "You know cars?" "No." "Me neither, really, but I've had that sound before." He hadn't, actually, but Felix had described it once in enough detail that Grant had retained it. "Is it drivable, you think? Like, can you make it to a town?" "I don't know." She was quiet for a second. "I don't really know where I'm going." She said it in a very flat, matter-of-fact tone, like it was logistical information rather than an admission, but it landed differently than she'd probably intended. Grant put his book down entirely. "Okay," he said. "I'm not asking for anything," she said quickly. I needed to stop, get my bearings." "That's what this place is for." She looked at him then, really looked at him, like she was trying to determine if the straightforwardness was genuine or a setup for something. He kept his expression neutral, which he'd gotten good at over years of business negotiations and terrible first dates and conversations with Sophie about why the rules existed. She looked back at her coffee. "There was a truck," she said, after another minute. "Behind me. On the highway. It stayed behind me for a long time. Probably nothing." "Probably," Grant said. He didn't say, and he didn't say, "Are you sure?" And he didn't do any of the things that might make her feel like she had to justify the fear. He just let the word sit there, with enough room around it for both possibilities to exist. Outside, the highway stayed dark. No headlights came. She exhaled slowly, and some of the rigid line in her shoulders eased, just slightly, like a cable under tension that had been loosened one half turn. "I'm Grant," he said. A pause. "Lena." Felix came out from the back around midnight, noticed the new customer, raised his eyebrows at Grant in a way that meant, "You want me to take over?" And Grant shook his head slightly. Felix went back to doing what he always did, moving between tables, refilling things, keeping the place running with the quiet efficiency of someone who had decided that a job done well was its own complete thing, separate from ambition. Grant made Lena another coffee without asking. She didn't object. Raymond paid his check around 12:20 and headed back to his rig. The girl with the pie had long since gone. It was just the two of them at the counter and the nighttime sounds of the cafe, the refrigeration unit behind the pastry case, the occasional creak of the building adjusting to the temperature drop outside, Felix somewhere doing dishes. "Do you know anything about Flagstaff?" Lena asked. She was looking at something on her phone. A map. He could see the blue line of a route. "A little. You heading there?" "Maybe. I don't know." She set the phone face down. "I keep changing my mind." "That's all right." "Is it?" She said it with a thin edge of something. Not sarcasm exactly, more like the question was directed at herself as much as him. "Generally, yeah." He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle. "I've made most of my best decisions by changing my mind at least 3 times first." She looked at him sideways. "What do you do?" "Tonight I'm refilling coffee." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "I meant for work." "I know what you meant." He paused, decided on a version of the truth. "I'm in tech. Software, mostly. Infrastructure stuff. It's as boring as it sounds." "Does it pay all right?" "It pays all right." She nodded, like that closed the topic, and he was grateful. He wasn't ready to explain the rest of it, and she didn't seem to want explanations from him any more than she wanted to give them. The car trouble turned out to be real. When she tried to leave around 1:30, the Nissan started but made a sound that even Grant, who knew almost nothing about engines, recognized as wrong. A low, rhythmic grinding that intensified when she rolled it forward a few feet, and then, alarmingly, a clunk that seemed to come from somewhere near the left front wheel. She sat in the car for a long moment after that. He could see her through the windshield, hands on the wheel, looking straight ahead. Then she turned it off and got out. "How bad?" she asked. "I don't know. Could be the wheel bearing. Could be worse." He crouched down beside the front wheel, which told him absolutely nothing, then stood back up. "There's a mechanic in Wickenburg, about 30 miles east, but he won't be open until 7. She looked at the highway, then at the car, then at nothing in particular. "I can't." She stopped. Tried again. "I don't have a lot of money right now to spend on repairs. Let's figure out what it needs first before we worry about the cost." "That's easy to say." "Yeah," he agreed. "It is." She glanced at him sharply, like she'd expected either offense or false reassurance, and wasn't sure what to do with neither. He gestured toward the cafe. "Come back inside. It's getting cold." "I can just sleep in my car." "You could," he said. "Or there's a storage room off the back that we've been half converting into a break room. It's got a couch, not a great couch, but a couch, and a working bathroom, and a lock on the door from the inside." She didn't say anything for a long moment. "Why would you do that?" she asked. It wasn't suspicion, exactly. It was more like genuine puzzlement, the question of someone who had been operating in a world where offers like that came with things attached, and couldn't locate the attachment here. Because it's almost 2 in the morning and you've got a broken car and nowhere to be, Grant said. And because this is technically my cafe, so nobody gets to tell me I can't offer someone the couch. He paused. Also, the parking lot lights go off at 3. It's pretty dark out here. She looked at the highway again. He didn't push. Okay, she said finally. One night. One night, he agreed. He showed her the back room, the couch, which was a brown sectional with a broken armrest that Felix had rescued from somewhere and wedged against the wall, the bathroom, the small shelf with extra blankets. There was a space heater that worked, a deadbolt on the door, and a window that looked out at nothing but desert and darkness. I'll have Felix put on a fresh pot of coffee before he leaves at 5, Grant said. The mechanic in Wickenburg opens at 7. Name's Dale. Tell him I sent you and he'll take a look for free. She turned to look at him from across the small room. The exhaustion in her face had settled into something quieter, less urgent. You don't know me, she said. No. I could be... She made a vague gesture that seemed to encompass a range of unspecified things. You could be, he agreed, but you're not. How do you know? He thought about it honestly. I don't exactly, but I've been reading people for a long time, and I'm pretty good at it. And what I see is someone who's been holding it together through sheer force of will for a while now, and who could use one night of not having to. Her jaw did something complicated, not quite crumpling. She was too practiced at control for that, but something moved under the surface of her expression, something that had been very tightly held. Good night, Lena, he said, and stepped back into the hallway, pulling the door toward closed. Grant, he stopped. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and let the door swing shut. He sat at the counter for another hour after that, not reading his book, listening to the building settle and the highway breathe and the distant, low conversation Felix was having on his phone in the kitchen. At some point he thought about Sophie, asleep in her room with her mismatched socks and whatever dream her 7-year-old brain was currently constructing. He thought about the fact that he'd brought Sophie to this cafe exactly once, on a Sunday afternoon, and she had declared the pie okay but not amazing with the kind of precise diplomatic honesty that still occasionally knocked the breath out of him. He didn't think about why he'd offered a stranger the backroom couch. He wasn't sure he needed to. Some things were just what they were. A broken car, a dark parking lot, a woman with fear in her eyes and no particular destination, and the only question was what you did with them. He'd made his choice the moment she walked in and didn't look at him like he was someone who could help her. People looked at him like that all the time, once they knew who he was. She'd looked at him like he was just another person in a late-night cafe, which was, more often than not, exactly how he wanted to be seen. She was gone by the time Felix came in for the early shift the following morning. Not gone. She'd left the blanket folded on the couch and a note, handwritten on the back of one of the cafe's order slips, that said, "Thank you. I'll pay you back for Dale." And below that, after a pause that you could somehow see in the handwriting, the coffee was better than I expected. Grant read it twice, folded it, and put it in his jacket pocket. She came back 4 days later. He didn't recognize her at first, or rather, he registered a familiar quality about the woman at the end of the counter before he consciously connected it to the night of the car. She'd let her hair down. She was wearing a different jacket, this one fitted, dark green. She looked rested in a way that sleep alone didn't fully account for, like something in her posture had reset slightly. She ordered coffee before he had a chance to offer it. Then she looked at him with those brown eyes and said, "Dale fixed the bearing. It cost less than I thought." "Good mechanic," Grant said. "You said you'd send me to him for free. He tried to charge me half price. I made him take full price." She paused. "I thought you should know that." "Why?" She considered it. "Because favors feel different when there's nothing you can do about them. I didn't want to owe you something I couldn't balance." He thought about that. "Does it feel balanced now?" "Not really, but closer." He poured her coffee and went back to the other end of the counter, where a trucker was waiting on a refill. He could feel her presence at the other end. Not in a dramatic way, just in the way you feel when the room has changed slightly, when some small thing has shifted in the composition of where you are. An hour passed. She stayed. They talked in the way that people talk in late-night diners. Not continuously, not in the structured back and forth of getting to know someone, but in pieces, with long silences between that neither of them felt obligated to fill. She mentioned she'd been to Flagstaff and decided against it. She asked him if the cafe did breakfast. He told her Felix made eggs if you caught him in the right mood. She smiled at that. A real smile. Not quite like the almost smile from before. Different wattage. He asked her what she'd done before she was traveling. Administrative work, she said. Scheduling, records management, that kind of thing. I'm good at keeping systems organized. I'm not great at... She stopped. Staying in one place? He offered. No, the opposite, actually. I was too good at staying. She looked at her cup. I stayed too long somewhere I shouldn't have. He didn't ask. She didn't elaborate. The silence did its work, and she stayed another 40 minutes. And when she left, she said she'd probably be back through in a few days. She was. She kept being back. The weeks built themselves in layers. She came in 3, sometimes 4 times a week. Always late, never before 10, sometimes not until after midnight. She always took the same stool at the end of the counter, always wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, always kept her jacket on for the first 20 minutes or so, like she needed to reserve the right to leave. He learned her in pieces because that was the only way she offered herself. Small revealed things, like cards laid down slowly in a game where neither player was entirely sure of the rules. She'd grown up in eastern Tennessee. She had a younger brother named Cal, who she hadn't spoken to in 2 years, and her expression when she mentioned him was the specific expression of someone who missed a person and was angry at themselves for missing them. She liked old movies, particularly anything with a woman doing something unexpected. She was a good cook and had worked briefly in a restaurant kitchen before the administrative jobs, and described it as the hardest thing she'd ever enjoyed. She didn't talk about where she was living, and he didn't ask. He assumed it was the kind of motel situation that people fell into when the geography of their life had become temporary, and he was right, as it turned out. But he didn't find that out for a while. He talked too, not about the company or the money. He kept that particular version of himself at a careful distance, the way he always did outside of work contexts. But about other things. About Sophie, which surprised him, because he rarely talked about Sophie with people he'd just met. There was a protective instinct around her that he'd developed early, a wariness about who got access to that particular part of his life. But one night Lena asked him if he had kids, asked it casually, without the particular charged quality the question sometimes carried, and he said yes, a daughter, 7, and something in his voice must have communicated more than the words, because she asked just as casually, "Is she all right?" "She's great," he said. He laughed a little, unexpectedly. "She's in a phase right now where she won't eat anything orange. Carrots, sweet potatoes, mandarin oranges. All gone. Complete boycott." Lena's expression shifted into something warmer. "My brother did that. Wouldn't eat green things for an entire year. My mom was beside herself. What fixed it?" He saw a cartoon where the character ate broccoli and got superpowers, ate an entire stalk the next day. She paused. "I might be misremembering. It might have been peer pressure from a friend. Either way, he grew out of it." "That's genuinely reassuring." "Kids are weird," she said, "but they're usually okay." He thought about that later, driving home at 2 a.m. with the highway empty and the desert sky doing the thing it did out here. Opening up, going enormous, stars in a density that still occasionally surprised him, even after years of Arizona. Kids are weird, but they're usually okay. He filed it in the same category as the other Lena things he'd started noticing himself filing. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the way she got more animate when she talked about food, the specific quality of silence she produced, which was somehow different from other people's silence, less like absence and more like presence with the volume down. He recognized what was happening. He wasn't naive about it. He also knew enough about his own history. The marriage that hadn't worked, the relationships after that had gone sideways, in the specific way that relationships go sideways when one person is always building something and the other person can never quite locate the space they're supposed to occupy in the architectures. To be careful. To not run toward things. He kept refilling her coffee. He stayed at his end of the counter when other customers needed him. He went home at a reasonable hour and got Sophie to school and went to his actual office and ran his actual company and came back the following Thursday and did it all again. Careful. About 6 weeks in, there was a night that was different from the others. It had rained earlier, unusual enough in this part of Arizona that people mentioned it, and the air outside still held the particular smell of desert after rain, petrichor mixed with something mineral and old. The cafe was quieter than usual. Felix had called in sick, and Grant had spent the shift actually working, moving between tables and the counter and the kitchen window with the kind of physical busyness that he found genuinely more satisfying than sitting in conference rooms. Lena came in around 11, later than usual. She sat down and didn't say anything for a while, which was normal, but the quality of the silence was different, tighter, like something was pushing against the inside of it. He put coffee in front of her. She looked at it. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." He went to the other end of the counter, wiped it down, came back. She was still looking at her coffee. "Lena." She looked up. "You don't have to be fine," he said. "It's almost midnight, and there's nobody else here. You can just be whatever you actually are." Her jaw tightened. Something moved behind her eyes. "I'm tired," she said. Not the logistical kind of tired, the deep structure kind. "Yeah," he said. "I'm so—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I'm just tired of everything costing something, you know? Like even the basic things, even the things that are supposed to be free, even rest." He didn't say anything, let it breathe. "I had a phone call today that I shouldn't have answered," she said. "That's all." "Okay. I'm not going to explain it. I didn't ask you to." She looked at him then, with something that might have been frustration, except that it wasn't quite directed at him. More like the frustration you feel when you've been braced for something, a fight, a condition, a demand, and it doesn't come, and your body doesn't know what to do with the energy it had prepared. "You're very easy to be around," she said. It came out almost like an accusation. "Sorry," he said. "No, you're not." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." She almost smiled, wrapped her hands around her mug. The tension in her shoulders eased by maybe 15%, which was not nothing. They stayed there until well past 1. He talked about Sophie's latest school project, a diorama of the solar system made mostly from styrofoam balls and a concerning amount of glitter. And she told him about a place she'd stopped once in New Mexico, a tiny restaurant that made tamales she'd been thinking about ever since, and whether she could recreate them from memory. They talked about music briefly, and about the specific phenomenon of songs that you only hear in certain places and then can't listen to anywhere else because they've become too attached to where you first heard them. At some point, sometime after 1 a.m., he realized that he was not being careful anymore, that somewhere in the past 6 weeks, Careful had quietly packed its things and left the building, and he hadn't noticed until just now. He noticed it the way you notice the moment a season has changed. Not the day it happens, but the day you look around and think, "Oh, it's different now." I don't know exactly when that started. He kept it to himself, refilled her coffee, walked her to her car at close to 2 in the morning, and stood in the parking lot while she started the engine, running fine now after Dale's work, and watched her reverse out and pull onto the highway. Stood there for a while after the taillights disappeared. The desert smelled like rain. Above him, the sign buzzed its incomplete name into the dark. He went back inside, turned off the lights. Locked up. Drove home through a sky full of stars and thought about a woman who was tired of everything costing something and a little girl who wouldn't eat anything orange and the specific quiet weight of a life that was full of things he'd built and somehow still felt like it had a room in it that was empty. He didn't do anything about it. Not that night. But he stopped pretending he hadn't noticed. The empty room he'd noticed on the drive home didn't go away. That was the thing about noticing something you'd been avoiding. Once you saw it clearly, it stayed visible. You couldn't unsee it by being busy, and Grant had tried being busy. He had a company with 240 employees, a daughter who needed help with her solar system diorama, a board meeting on the 15th, and a quarterly review that his CFO kept rescheduling with the nervous energy of someone who had bad news they were trying to present in the best possible sequence. He had more than enough to fill the hours. And yet, he kept coming back to the cafe on Thursdays, then Tuesdays. Then, around the third week of November, a Sunday afternoon when he had no particular reason to be there and went anyway, driving out on the highway with the windows down and the November air cooler than it looked from inside a house, telling himself he needed to check in on Felix, which was not entirely a lie and also not entirely the truth. Felix didn't need checking in on. Felix ran the cafe with a calm competence that had long since stopped requiring oversight. What Felix actually did when Grant walked in that Sunday was look at him from behind the counter with the particular expression of a man who has formed a private theory and is waiting to see how long it takes for the evidence to confirm it. "She's not here," Felix said. "It's Sunday." "I know it's Sunday." "She comes in Tuesdays and Thursdays, mostly. Sometimes Saturdays late." Grant poured himself a coffee. "I'm not here for that." "Okay. I'm checking in." "On what?" Grant looked around the cafe, which was running perfectly. Clean tables, stocked counter, the afternoon light doing something decent through the west-facing windows. "On the place?" "The place is fine," Felix said. He went back to wiping down the espresso machine. "It's been fine for 3 years." Grant drank his coffee, stayed for an hour, drove home. He did not come back on Sunday again. Matzat. What he did instead, because he was a man who had built a company by understanding systems and refusing to pretend that the uncomfortable data points didn't exist, was admit the thing to himself clearly and then decide what to do about it. He was developing feelings for a woman he knew almost nothing about, a woman who paid in cash, never mentioned a last name, kept her jacket on for the first 20 minutes of every visit, and had told him exactly once, in that oblique, careful way she had of not quite telling things, that she'd stayed somewhere too long. A woman who was clearly running from something she hadn't named, who appeared at late hours and left without much warning, who had the specific quality of someone who had learned to hold the shape of their life loosely, ready to dissolve it quickly if necessary. He knew all of this. He wasn't an idiot. He was also 32 years old and had spent the last 6 years building things and raising his daughter and sleeping alone in a house that was too big, and had somehow managed to reach a place where the only time his brain went quiet was when he was sitting at the end of a counter in a cafe that didn't have all its letters, across from a woman he couldn't stop thinking about. So he did what he'd always done with complicated problems. He sat with it, didn't rush it, and paid attention. Lena came in on a Tuesday in late November and ordered eggs for the first time. It was a small thing, but she'd always, before that, only ordered coffee. Food felt like a longer commitment. It meant staying, meant settling, meant something more than coffee, which could always be abandoned mid-cup if the situation required it. Eggs meant a plate, meant waiting, meant the implicit agreement to be there long enough to eat something. Felix made them. She ate them at the counter, and Grant, who was stocking the pastry case, watched her from the corner of his eye and tried not to read too much into it, which was, of course, the surest sign that he was reading everything into it. "How's the car?" he asked, coming around the counter. "Still running." The noise came back a little. A different noise, though. A new noise or the same noise? Honestly, I can't tell. It only does it when it's cold. That might just be the temperature. Cars do weird things when it gets cold. It does weird things when it's hot, too. She cut a piece of egg with the side of her fork. "It's an old car." "How old?" "Older than it should be for how much I've put it through." She paused. "I've put a lot of miles on it this year." He sat down at the counter, one stool away from her. He'd started doing that over the past few weeks, closing the distance slightly without making a thing of it. "Where'd you come from?" "Originally, I mean, before Arizona." She chewed, considering how much of that to answer. "New Mexico, before that Texas, before that—" She tilted her head. "It's a longer list than you'd want to hear." "I've got time." "You're working." "Felix is working. I'm sitting." She almost smiled. "Before Texas, it was Oklahoma for a bit, and before that, back east. Tennessee, then a few places after Tennessee." She looked at her plate. "I'm not great at geography. I mean, I know where these places are. I just don't always know why I ended up in them. How do you decide where to go? Mostly by deciding where not to go. She said it simply, without self-pity, which somehow made it more quietly devastating than if she'd said it with feeling. You rule out the places that aren't safe and see what's left. He let that sentence exist in the air for a moment, without trying to patch over it or ask the obvious follow-up question. Do you like Arizona? He asked instead. She considered it like it was a real question, which he supposed it was. The sky is different here, she said finally. I don't know how to explain it. It's bigger, I guess. You look up and there's just more of it. She moved her fork around her plate. I like that. I've always felt better when there's more sky. He thought about that. About what it meant to have spent enough time in places where the sky felt small. Close buildings, narrow streets, the specific claustrophobia of living somewhere you couldn't breathe properly. That you'd developed a preference for the open kind. Well, he said, Arizona's got sky. It does, she agreed. Quote, December came in cold and clear, the way Arizona Decembers did, dry and sharp-edged, the mountains north of Phoenix occasionally dusted white at the peaks, the desert doing its winter thing of being austere and strange and oddly beautiful. Sophie had a school Christmas concert in the second week of the month, and Grant sat in a folding chair in a gymnasium and watched her sing 2 verses of a song he didn't recognize with the earnest, slightly off-key commitment of a child who was performing not for the audience but for herself. And he felt the particular sharp, sweet weight of loving someone so much it occasionally felt structural, like it was actually holding him upright. He took her to dinner after, just the 2 of them, at a pizza place she'd chosen. She ate 3 slices and talked without much pause about a girl in her class named Priya who had a pet rabbit, and whether it was possible to have both a rabbit and a dog, and had he ever had a dog, and why not? I wasn't home enough, he said. You're home more now, Sophie said, with the directness of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned to soften observations. Yeah, he said. I am. She pulled a piece of cheese off her pizza and ate it separately. Mrs. Reyes said you go out late sometimes. I do. To your cafe thing? He looked at her. She told you about that? I asked where you went. Sophie was unrepentant. She said you had a cafe place, like a restaurant thing. It's a cafe, on the highway. Can I come? I took you once. I know, the pie was okay. She seemed to file this away. Do you go because you like it there? He thought about the honest answer to that question, which was complicated, and arrived at the simplest true version. Yeah, he said, I do. Sophie appeared to find this acceptable. She went back to her pizza. Priya's rabbit is named Biscuit, she said. I think that's a good name for a rabbit. It's a great name, Grant agreed. He drove home that night thinking about Sophie's question, the simple version of it. Do you go because you like it there? Yes, and what he liked there had shifted over the past 2 months until it was primarily one thing, one person, which was both straightforward and not straightforward at all. He told Lena about the concert the following Tuesday, not in a big way. He just mentioned it while she was on her second coffee. Something about Sophie's off-key singing and the gymnasium chairs and the rabbit named Biscuit. And Lena listened with the particular quality of attention she had, which was fully present and not performing interest, just actually interested. Did she know you were nervous? Lena asked. About what? Watching her. I assume you were nervous. Parents always look terrified at those things. He laughed, which surprised him a little. I wasn't terrified. You look terrified. Parents always do. I've watched it from the other side. I used to help out at my nephew's school events before... She stopped, cleared her throat. Anyway, the kids never know. They're too busy performing. She was great, he said. Off-key, but great. The best kind. Lena turned her cup slowly. What's she like, Sophie? He thought about how to describe his daughter to someone who'd never met her, which was harder than it should have been because Sophie was not a describable thing. She was an experience. She's very honest, he said. Not mean honest, just she says what she's actually thinking, without the filter most adults develop. He paused. She told me last week that my jacket was ugly, just directly. No preamble. Is it ugly? Honestly, a little bit. It's old. Lena's mouth curved. She sounds like someone worth knowing. She is. He said it simply, and the simplicity of it sat between them without needing anything added to it. Lena looked at the counter, traced a small circle on the laminate with one finger. I always thought I'd... She didn't finish it. Thought you'd what? Nothing. She picked up her coffee. Never mind. He didn't push, but he registered it. The unfinished sentence, the way she'd moved toward something and then pulled back, which was, he'd noticed, the pattern of her. She moved toward things and then recalibrated, checked some internal measurement, decided how much was safe. He understood the impulse. He'd spent years doing the same thing, building toward things and then stepping back to evaluate, making sure the structure was sound before he committed his weight to it. The difference, he was beginning to think, was that his version of careful was a professional habit and hers was something harder won. There was a night in the middle of December when the cafe was close to full, a rarity, usually explained by weather or some event that rerouted highway traffic. And Grant was actually busy in the real sense, not the puttering around sense. Lena came in around 11, and there were no stools open at the counter. He saw her stop in the doorway, take in the room, and for a moment do that calculus he'd learned to recognize, the quick scan, the assessment of exits, the split-second decision about whether this situation was navigable. He caught her eye from across the room and tilted his head toward the back, toward the small hallway that led to the break room and the office. She raised her eyebrows. He shrugged, which he hoped communicated there's a table in back if you want. She worked her way through the room. He followed a minute later, carrying 2 coffees. The back hallway had a small table that had been there since before Grant bought the place. A round two-top wedged under a set of shelving units that held spare inventory, paper towels, coffee cans in bulk. It was not atmospheric. The fluorescent light above it buzzed with more urgency than the sign out front. But it was quiet, separated from the main room by a half wall and a good 15 feet. They sat across from each other, which they'd never done before. Counterside, there was always the slight relief of sitting beside rather than across, facing the same direction, able to look away easily, less of the focused intimacy of direct eye contact. Across a table was different, more confrontational, in the way that honesty is sometimes confrontational. She noticed it too. He could tell by the way she held her mug a little more deliberately. Busy night, she said. Road closure north of here. Everyone's taking the highway. Ah. She looked around the small hallway, the shelves of paper goods and cleaning supplies. Glamorous. I know, most people don't get to have their coffee next to 60 rolls of paper towels. She laughed at that. A real laugh, short and surprised. Not the almost smiles he'd catalogued over the past 2 months. He felt it like a small key turning somewhere. They stayed in the back hallway for almost 2 hours. The main room thinned out gradually. At some point, Felix stuck his head in, looked at the two of them, and retreated with the expression of a man who has confirmed his theory and considers the matter closed. They talked about things they hadn't talked about before, which sometimes happens when the setting changes and the usual grooves of conversation aren't available. She told him about working in a restaurant kitchen, the specific hierarchy of it, the language that evolved among people who spent 10 hours a day in a high-pressure enclosed space, the way she'd been terrible at breakfast service but good at dinner, the way she'd burned herself twice in the first week and learned to read the heat of a pan by sound rather than touch. He told her about the early days of his first company, the rental house, the other 2 guys, the way they'd subsisted on instant noodles and catastrophically bad decisions about work-life balance, the specific kind of hope that exists when you're building something and don't yet know whether it's going to amount to anything or collapse into a good story you tell at dinner parties. Were you scared? She asked. Constantly, he said. I was 24 and I dropped out of school and sunk everything I had into software that might or might not work. I was scared all the time, but you kept going. I didn't know what else to do. He turned his cup. I think that's usually how it works. It's not that courageous people aren't scared. It's that they're more afraid of not trying than they are of failing. She looked at him steadily. That's easy to say when it worked out. Yeah, he said. It is. You're right. She seemed to appreciate that he didn't argue with her. What if it hadn't? I don't know. I'd probably be doing something else, working for someone else's company, living differently. He paused. Failing would have hurt, but it wouldn't have... He stopped, found the right word. It wouldn't have hollowed me out. Not trying would have. She was quiet for a moment. Some things hollow you out even when you do try, she said. Yeah, he said quietly. They do. The fluorescent light buzzed above them. From the main room came the muffled sounds of Felix closing down the counter, the rattle of chairs being stacked. Outside, the highway was quieter now, the diverted traffic having mostly passed through. I'm not a very easy person, Lena said. She said it not as self-deprecation, but as factual information, delivered with the directness of someone who had decided to be fair about themselves. I'm not easy to get close to. I don't do things in a normal way. I don't have a fixed address. I don't have a plan. She stopped. I don't have a lot of things that people my age are supposed to have. Okay, Grant said. I'm just telling you. I hear you. Because I think you're... She looked at him, then at the table, then back. I think you might be getting ideas. He considered denying it and decided not to. Probably, she exhaled. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. I'm not asking you for anything. I know. She pressed her lips together. That's sort of the problem. He looked at her across the small table in the buzzing fluorescent light next to 60 rolls of paper towels and felt the specific weight of a moment that would be easy to mishandle. He'd mishandled moments before, knew his own tendencies, the way he sometimes moved too fast in the direction of what he wanted once he'd decided he wanted it, mistaking decisiveness for wisdom. Lena, he said. She looked at him. I'm not going anywhere, he said. That's all. This isn't a move. I'm just sitting here. I've been sitting here for 2 months, and I'll keep sitting here. He spread his hand slightly. That's the whole thing. She studied him for a long time. The particular quality of her attention, that full presence thing she had, actually looking rather than glancing, was something he'd gotten used to, but it still had a slight intensity to it, like being the subject of a quiet but serious examination. Okay, she said finally. Okay. I still don't know what to do with it. That's fine, he said. We don't have to know tonight. She nodded. Wrapped her hands around her mug, which had gone cold. Didn't ask for a refill, didn't check her phone, didn't reach for her jacket in the preparatory way she sometimes did when she was getting ready to leave. She just stayed. The week before Christmas, Grant did something he hadn't planned to do and wasn't entirely sure was a good idea, and did it anyway. He told her he owned the cafe. It came out not as a confession, not as a big reveal, but sideways. They were talking about the sign out front, the missing E in cafe, and she asked why nobody'd fixed it, and he said he kept forgetting to call the sign company, and she said you could tell the owner, and he said I am the owner, and the sentence was already out before he'd made a conscious decision to say it. She looked at him. You own this place, she said. Yeah. You work here, pouring coffee. Sometimes. Does Felix know? No. She sat with that for a moment. Why not? Because when he knows, I become the owner instead of just Grant, and I like being just Grant here. He paused. It's complicated. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her recalibrating. Not dramatically, but the way you recalibrate when a piece of information changes the proportions of something you thought you understood. What else do you do? She asked. Besides own a cafe and pour coffee. He told her. Not all of it. Not with numbers, but the shape of it. The software company, the exit, the second company, the industry he'd spent the last 8 years building something in. He watched her face as he said it, not to gauge her reaction to the money, but because her face was where she actually lived, and he'd gotten good at reading it. What he saw was not the particular expression he'd grown to recognize and dislike in others, the recalibration toward advantage, the faint recalculation of what he might be worth to them. What he saw was something more complicated, something that looked, honestly, a little like worry. "Okay," she said, when he'd finished. "Okay? I mean," she made a small gesture. "That's a lot. It's just work. It's not just work, it's—" She stopped. "You're very different from what I thought." "Am I?" "You're very different from what you seem," she said, which was a more precise version of the same thing. "Does that change something?" She looked at her coffee. "I don't know yet." He gave her the time to not know. They stayed in the back hallway a while longer, not talking much, and when she finally stood to leave, he walked her out to the parking lot the way he usually did, and she stood by her car with her keys in her hand and her jacket against the December cold, and she looked up at the sky, that big Arizona sky she'd said she liked, and didn't say anything for a moment. "I grew up without much," she said to the sky. "I'm not good around money, around big things. It makes me nervous." "I know." "You don't actually know. You can't." "Fair enough," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not different because of what you told me. I want you to know that. I'm still—" She seemed to be working out how to finish the sentence. "I'm still just figuring out if I'm safe here." "You're safe here," he said. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted. "I can't." She nodded like that was the right answer. Like the wrong answer would have been the reassurance itself, the easy promise, and the fact that he didn't make it was more trustworthy than if he had. She got in her car. He stood in the parking lot and watched her drive away. The December air was cold and completely still. Above him, the sign said Desert Mile Calf and hummed its crooked little note into the dark. Christmas came and went. Grant spent it with Sophie, who got a bike she'd been asking about for 3 months and spent most of the afternoon riding it up and down the sidewalk in front of the house, while Grant stood on the driveway and watched and felt that particular feeling, that compressive, frightening love, work its way through him in slow waves. Sophie crashed twice, got up both times, dusted off her knees, got back on. He thought about what he'd said to Lena. It's not that courageous people aren't scared. It's that they're more afraid of not trying than they are of failing. He thought about his daughter on her bike, falling and getting up, falling and getting up, not because she wasn't scared, but because the bike was worth it. He brought a small Christmas gift to the cafe the week after. Nothing large, a coffee thermos, a good one, insulated, the kind that kept things hot for hours. Useful for long drives. He'd wrapped it in brown paper because he didn't have proper wrapping paper at the cafe, and he wasn't going to make a production of it. She looked at it on the counter when she came in on a Tuesday, then at him. "It's practical," he said. "I can see that. You drive a lot. Cold coffee is one of the things I imagine makes that worse." She picked it up, turned it over in her hands. Her expression was doing the complicated thing it sometimes did, not shutting down, but not entirely opening either, occupying some middle register that he was slowly learning to read. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know. This is—" She stopped, set the thermos down, picked it back up. "Thank you." "You're welcome." She held it for a moment, and he watched something move through her expression. A warmth she wasn't entirely suppressing, and maybe wasn't trying to entirely suppress, which was new. "I don't have anything for you," she said. "That's all right." "It doesn't feel all right." "Lena." He waited until she looked at him. "You come back. That's enough." She held his gaze for a moment that stretched just past comfortable. Then she set the thermos carefully beside her coffee mug, took off her jacket. She did that sometimes now, took it off within the first 5 minutes, and he'd noticed when the shift happened and said nothing about it, and folded it on the stool beside her. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Felix, at the far end of the counter, made no expression whatsoever, which was the most expressive thing he was capable of. January came with wind and a cold front that lasted 2 weeks and kept the highway quieter than usual. Lena came in 3 times the first week and twice the second. And on the second visit of the second week, she sat down and said, without preamble, "I need to tell you something." Grant set down what he was doing, came around to the counter, sat on the stool beside her. He'd started doing that, taking the stool beside her rather than staying on the work side, somewhere around early December, and neither of them had said anything about it. "Okay," he said. She looked at her hands. "Not tonight. I'm not ready tonight." She looked up. "But soon. There are things you should know. About why I'm here. About—" She stopped. "About what I'm running from." He looked at her steadily. "Whenever you're ready." "It's not a good story," she said. "Most real stories aren't." She nodded once, wrapped her hands around her coffee. Outside, the wind hit the building in a long, low push that made the windows hum. The sign out front, Desert Mile Calf, probably swaying slightly on its posts, though neither of them could see it from inside. She stayed until the wind died down. They talked about other things, small, easy things, the kind of conversation that serves as scaffolding when the real conversation is being gathered. And when she left, she said goodnight in a way that was quieter than usual, weighted with the specific gravity of something approaching. He locked up, drove home, lay awake for a while, listening to the night, thinking about real stories and the fact that they rarely arrived with clean edges or satisfying shapes, and that you had to want the person more than you wanted the clean edges, and that he had been wanting this particular person for 2 months now in a way that felt, at this point, like a foundational thing, something load-bearing, something that would leave a structural gap if you took it away. He was not a man who scared easily. He'd built too much, risked too much, lost too much, to be stopped by being scared. But he lay there a while longer anyway, in the particular silence of a house where his daughter slept down the hall, and let himself understand the full weight of what was starting and what it would mean to let it. She made him wait 9 more days. He counted them, which was not something he would have admitted to anyone, least of all himself in the clearer light of morning. But he counted them the way you count things when the waiting has a specific weight. Tuesday passed, then a Thursday when she didn't come, then a Saturday, and by the following Tuesday, he had almost convinced himself that the soon she'd promised was a kind of exit, a soft door she'd built for herself in case she needed to use it. She came in on a Wednesday. She'd never come on a Wednesday before. It was nearly midnight. The wind had been gone for a week, but the cold had stayed, and she was wearing a heavier coat than he'd seen on her before, dark wool, and she came in with a particular quality of motion, deliberate, like she'd made a decision and was walking through it before she could unmake it. She sat down. He poured the coffee without being asked. Felix was in the kitchen, and there were 2 other customers at a far booth, a couple speaking quietly, and the cafe had the particular ambient hush of a place that is occupied but not crowded, where sound travels differently, gets absorbed by the spaces between people. Lena wrapped her hands around the mug, stared at it. "I was married," she said. She said it the way you say the first line of something you've rehearsed, not flat exactly, but with the rhythm of words that have been arranged carefully in advance. "Okay," Grant said. "His name is Marcus Vale. We met in Nashville. I was doing admin work at a property management company. He was one of the clients." She paused. "He was charming. I know how that sounds. Everyone says that about the wrong people. But he had a way of making you feel like the most important thing in the room. Like he'd been waiting specifically for you." Her jaw tightened slightly. "That turns out to be a skill some people develop. It's not the same as actually caring." Grant stayed still. Didn't reach for his coffee. Didn't move. He'd learned over months of these carefully rationed conversations that she read physical restlessness as impatience, and impatience as a reason to close up. "We were married for 4 years, Lena continued. The first year was fine. Not what I'd imagined, but fine. He traveled a lot. He had money from his family, some kind of real estate operation that I never fully understood, and he was gone a lot, and when he was home, he was—" She stopped, took a breath. "He needed to know where I was. All the time, every hour. It started as this thing that seemed like caring. Call me when you get there. Text me when you leave. And then it shifted into something else, and by the time I understood what it had become, I was already inside it." She turned her mug in a slow circle on the counter. "He didn't hit me," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I know people have a picture in their head of what this looks like, and it's usually that. It wasn't that." She paused. It was quieter. He controlled the money. He controlled who I could see. My brother Cal, I mentioned him once, I don't know if you remember. Marcus didn't like him, thought he was a bad influence, too disruptive, too whatever. So I saw Cal less and less, and then not at all, because every time I did it cost me something. Not in a physical way, just in the atmosphere of the house would change. For days, and I'd rather not see Cal than live in that atmosphere. That's still a cost, Grant said quietly. Yeah. She looked at him. I know that now. He held her gaze for a moment, then let her look away, which she did back at the coffee. The year before I left, I'd been trying to figure out how to do it safely, because by then I understood. I didn't have money of my own. My name wasn't on our accounts, wasn't on the house. I didn't have a credit card. Everything went through him. She pressed her lips together. He wasn't stupid. People like him aren't stupid. They're methodical. How did you get out? My coworker. There was a woman I worked with at a different job by then. I'd gone back to work about 2 years in, partly because I was losing my mind and partly because I needed something that was mine. Her name was Ruth. She'd been through something similar years before, and she'd figured out what to look for. Lena's voice had changed slightly, more controlled now, like she was narrating something she'd achieved distance from or was working to. She helped me open an account he didn't know about. I'd put in small amounts, cash when I could, over about 8 months. Nothing he'd notice. And then one night when he was in Memphis for a week, I took what I had, took my car, took 2 bags, and left. Tennessee? I left a note. I know, classic. And I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew it couldn't be anywhere he'd look first, and Marcus would look. She stopped. He looked, Grant said. He's been looking. She said it in the present tense, and that was the word that changed the whole shape of the story. Not he looked. He's been looking. I've moved 4 times in 14 months. I went west because he doesn't know the West. His whole world is east of the Mississippi, always has been. And I thought the distance would help. And it did, for a while. But he has money, and he has people who work for him, and she exhaled slowly. He found out I was in New Mexico. I don't know how. A month later I was in Texas, and then somehow he got close to Texas too. I don't think he had an address. I think he had, I don't know, someone making inquiries, asking around. She looked at Grant. He's not the kind of man who accepts that something he considers his is just gone. The cafe was quiet. The couple in the far booth had left while she was talking, and Grant hadn't noticed them go. It was just them now, and Felix in the kitchen, and the hum of the refrigeration unit, and the pink-blue neon. The truck, Grant said. That first night. The one you thought was following you. I still don't know if it was his. Probably not. But when you've been running long enough, you start seeing the threat in everything, and you can't always tell the difference between instinct and paranoia. She looked at her hands. That's the other thing it does to you. It makes you distrust your own reading of things. Because he spent 4 years telling me my reading of things was wrong. Grant looked at her for a long moment. At the set of her jaw and the slight tension around her eyes that didn't fully relax even when the rest of her face did. Like it had been tense so long, it had forgotten how to let go. Does he know you're in Arizona? He asked. I don't think so. Not yet. She said the last part carefully. I've been careful. Cash for everything. No cards, no accounts, nothing with my name. She paused. The motel I've been staying at. The owner does weekly cash rentals, no questions. I've been there 2 months, which is the longest I've stayed anywhere. 2 months. Since roughly the night she'd pulled into his parking lot. He didn't say that out loud, just registered it, added it to the picture that was assembling itself. The woman who'd kept her jacket on, who'd always seemed poised to leave, who'd paid in cash and never mentioned a last name, who'd said, I'm not asking for anything on her first night, as if she'd had to train herself to need less so that losing things would hurt less. Lena, he said. I'm not telling you this because I want something, she said quickly, which was exactly what he'd expected her to say. I'm telling you because you've been... She stopped, regrouped. Because you deserve to know what you've been sitting across from, what the actual situation is. The actual situation, he said, is that you're a person who got out of something bad, and has been taking care of yourself for over a year. That's what I've been sitting across from." She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read, something between gratitude and resistance, like she wanted to accept what he'd said and couldn't quite let herself. "Don't make it heroic." "I'm not." "It's not heroic? I'm scared most of the time. I'm tired all the time. I make bad decisions because I'm tired and scared, and I'm not always thinking straight." Her voice had gotten quieter. "I left behind everyone I knew. My brother, a few friends I actually had, back before Marcus made that complicated. I don't have a life. I have a motel room and a car that makes a noise in a cafe I've been coming to because it's the first place in 14 months where I didn't feel like I had to watch the door." The last sentence came out with the involuntary quality of something she hadn't entirely meant to say. She heard it herself. He could see the slight flicker of awareness cross her face and didn't take it back, just looked at the counter. "You don't have to watch the door here," he said. "I know." And the way she said it, the simplicity of it, the absence of qualification, was the most open thing she'd said to him in 3 months. Felix left at 1. He said goodnight to Grant, looked at Lena with the careful non-expression he'd perfected, and headed out through the back. The cafe was theirs. They stayed on the bar stools for a while, not talking, which was its own kind of talking. Grant drank his third coffee of the night, which he'd pay for at 3 in the morning, and watched the highway through the window. Nothing came. The desert sat in its winter stillness, and the stars were enormous, and the sign hummed its missing letter into the cold. "Can I ask you something?" Lena said. "Yeah." "Why do you come here? Really?" She turned on her stool to look at him directly. "You have, from what you told me, you have a house and a company and a full life. You have a daughter you clearly love. You have money, and I assume people and options and everything that implies. So why do you spend your nights in a highway cafe that you secretly own, pouring coffee for people you don't know?" He thought about the honest answer, which was layered, and gave her the layers in the right order. "Because when I'm here, nobody needs anything from me," he said. "My company needs things from me. My investors need things. The people who read about me in magazines have a version of me that needs maintaining. Even," he paused, "even Sophie needs things, which is right and good. She's 7, and she should need things from her father. But the needing is," he searched for the word, "it's constant. It's the ground condition of my life, and here I'm just a guy who knows where the extra coffee filters are." Lena was quiet for a moment. "That's lonelier than it sounds." "Yeah," he said. "It is. Does it bother you, being lonely?" "It bothers me more some nights than others." He looked at her. "Recently it's been bothering me more." She held his gaze, didn't look away. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Not romantically, not as a prelude to something, just factual, like stating the terms of a problem. "I don't know how to be... I've been in survival mode for so long that I don't know what it looks like when I'm not. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I'm capable of. I don't know if anything I feel right now is real or just..." She pressed her fingers against her forehead. "Gratitude. Proximity. Whatever you call it when someone is kind to you and you've been without kindness for long enough that you can't tell the difference anymore." "That's a fair thing to wonder," Grant said. "You're not going to tell me it's real." "I don't think you'd believe me if I did." "No," she agreed. "I wouldn't. So I won't." He turned his coffee cup. "What I can tell you is that whatever it is from my side, I'm not interested in performing it or rushing it or making it into something it isn't. I'm 32 years old. I've built a company and raised a kid mostly alone, and I've had relationships that went wrong in specific ways I've thought about enough to understand. I know the difference between what I want and what I think I should want." He looked at her, "and I'm not confused about which category this is in." She exhaled, looked at the counter, at the window, at some middle distance. "I'm not an easy thing to choose," she said. "I come with complications. Everyone comes with complications. Mine are active." She meant Marcus, the looking, the truck she still wasn't sure about. "I know," he said. "And you're bull..." She gestured vaguely, meaning everything about him. The money, the company, the profile, the fact that he existed in the world in a way that was public and traceable in ways that she, right now, could not afford to be. I know, he said again. I'm not asking you to decide anything. I'm not asking you for anything tonight. I just want you to know where I stand. She looked at him for a long moment. The cafe was very quiet. Outside, nothing moved on the highway. Okay, she said. And then, because she was Lena and she did things at her own pace and on her own terms, and he had learned that about her and respected it, she leaned forward across the small distance between their stools and kissed him. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It was careful and specific, the way she was careful and specific about things. And it tasted like coffee and 3 months of accumulated almost. And when she pulled back, she looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the wariness, not the calculation, not the exhaustion. Something more vulnerable than all of those, and more present, and not quite scared. I've been wanting to do that for a while, she said. Yeah, he said. Me too. She almost smiled, started to say something, and then the headlights swept across the window. It was the angle of them that was wrong. Most cars on the highway moved at speed. Their lights would cross the cafe window in a smooth, continuous arc, there and gone in 2 or 3 seconds. These lights came slower, and they didn't pass. They sat. Somewhere in the parking lot, just beyond the cone of the exterior lights, a vehicle had stopped with its headlights pointed toward the building. Lena had gone very still. He watched it happen to her body. The specific kind of stillness that isn't peaceful, that's the opposite of peaceful, that's every muscle preparing for something. Her hand, which had been resting on the counter near his, withdrew. Is the back door unlocked? She said. Her voice was level, controlled, the voice of someone who had thought through scenarios. Yes. Felix uses it. What's past the back door? Storage area, then an access road that runs behind the property. It connects to Old Miller Road about a 1/4 mile south. She was already off the stool, already had her coat. She moved with a speed that was practiced, that came from having done this before, or having rehearsed it in her head enough times that it had become muscle memory. Lena, he stood. You don't know it's him. I don't know it isn't. She was checking the back hallway, the door. It could be anyone, someone pulling over. Grant. She turned. Her face was completely different now from the face she'd had 30 seconds ago. The vulnerability gone, the wall back up, and something harder behind the wall, something that looked like fear running so fast it was almost indistinguishable from control. I've been doing this for 14 months. I know the difference between a car pulling over and a car watching. He went to the window, looked carefully. The vehicle was a pickup truck, dark-colored, pulled into the far end of the lot without its parking lights on. Sitting. He couldn't see the plates from here. He couldn't see the driver. Okay, he said. He moved to the counter, found his phone. I'm calling the county sheriff, non-emergency. I'll say there's a suspicious vehicle. Don't, she said it sharply. Why not? Because if it's him, police involvement means my name goes into a system. And if my name goes into a system, he finds you. Or he uses it. He has connections, Grant. Legal connections. He has a lawyer in Nashville who makes things. He's not a criminal. He's just a man with money and patience and a very particular idea of ownership. She said ownership the way you say a word that you've had to practice saying neutrally so it doesn't break you every time. Grant looked at the truck, looked at Lena. He thought about $400 million and the things money could and couldn't do. And about a man named Marcus Vale who had spent 4 years dismantling a woman piece by piece and considered that a reasonable use of his time. The back door, he said. Yes. I'm coming with you. She stopped. You don't have to. I know the property. The access road has a gate in the dark. You'll walk into it. He was already moving toward the back. And I'm not going to stand here while you go out alone. She looked at him for a fraction of a second. That assessment she did, that rapid private calculation, and then she moved. They went through the kitchen, through the storage room, out the back door into the cold desert night. The air was sharp and very still. Above them the stars were indifferent and enormous. The storage area was a patch of packed dirt with a utility shed and some propane tanks, and beyond it a chain-link fence with a gate that was, as Grant had said, completely invisible in the dark. He went first, found the gate by memory, worked the latch. It swung open. "There's a rise about 50 yards out," he said quietly. "Then the road." "I know where I'm going," she said, and then immediately, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help. It's fine." "It's not fine. You're not the problem." "I know." They moved across the desert scrub, Grant watching the ground and Lena watching back toward the cafe, and they made the rise and found the access road, which was unpaved and faintly luminescent under the stars, and they stood there for a moment catching their breath in the cold air. "What's parked here?" Lena asked. The access road was empty. "Nothing. I drove around front tonight." He looked back toward the building. From here you could see the glow of the sign, faintly, and the edge of the front lot. The truck was still there, still not moving. "I need my car," she said. "Not yet." "Grant, just wait." He was looking at the truck. As they watched, the headlights went off. The parking lot went darker. Nothing else moved. They stood there for 2 full minutes. Then the truck moved. Slow, backing out of the lot, no lights until it reached the highway, and then the headlights came on, and it pulled east and was gone. Lena let out a breath that had been held so long it was almost a sound. "Okay," Grant said. "Okay," she said. Her voice had changed again. The control cracking at the edges, the adrenaline doing what adrenaline did when the immediate trigger was removed. Her hands, he noticed, weren't entirely steady. He didn't touch her. Not yet. He stood beside her and let the desert air do its work, the cold and the stillness and the enormous indifferent sky. "Could have been nobody," she said after a while. "Could have been. I've done this before, evacuated a situation that turned out to be nothing." She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "The smoke alarm goes off in the motel parking lot 2 months ago, and I'm packed and ready to drive before I'm fully awake." "That's what happens when you've had to be that fast," he said. "It's exhausting." She said it simply, not looking for sympathy, just naming a fact. Being that fast all the time, being ready all the time. She looked at the sky. "I'm so tired of being ready." He understood then, or understood it more completely than he had before. What she'd been carrying. Not just the practical weight of moving and hiding and managing money and watching for trucks, but the deeper weight of a nervous system that had been permanently set to high alert, that couldn't fully relax because the cost of relaxing in her previous life had been so high. A body that had learned to treat rest as a luxury it couldn't safely afford. "You can rest tonight," he said. "If you want. The back room's still got the couch." She looked at him. "That's where this started." "Yeah," he said. "It is." She was quiet for a moment. The desert made its small night sounds, something moving in the brush a ways off, the distant low moan of the wind across the mesa. "I'll stay," she said. "Just tonight." "Just tonight," he agreed. They walked back through the gate, across the storage area, into the kitchen. Grant locked the back door, then went to the front and stood at the window for a long moment, looking out at the empty parking lot, the empty highway. Nothing. He made 2 new coffees. Lena was sitting at the counter, her coat on again, but differently than before. Not the preparatory way, not the I might need to leave way, just wearing it because it was cold. "I'm sorry about earlier," she said. He looked at her. "Don't apologize for that." "I'm not apologizing for the kiss. I'm apologizing for the abruptness of what came after." "A truck appeared and you reacted appropriately given your circumstances," he said. "There's nothing to apologize for." She took the coffee he put in front of her. "It's not exactly a normal evening." "No," he said. "But I don't come here for normal." She looked at him with that expression again, the one he'd seen for a fraction of a second before the truck, the one that was younger than her usual face, less defended. It was still there, the vulnerability, though the circumstances had shifted around it. "Grant." "Yeah. Nothing about my life is simple right now. I want you to understand that." "I do." And I'm not, she chose the words carefully. I'm not in a position to offer anything reliable. I don't know where I'll be in a month. I don't know if he'll find me. I don't know. Lena. He sat down beside her, waited until she looked at him. I'm not asking you to have a plan. I'm not asking you for reliable. I'm asking you to have coffee with me and to still be here in the morning. She held his gaze. The cafe hummed around them. The refrigeration, the neon, the particular alive quiet of a building at 2 in the morning. I can do that, she said. Good, he said. They stayed up until nearly 4, not talking about the truck, not talking about Marcus Vale, not performing bravery or normalcy. Just two people in a late-night cafe, one of whom was trying to learn how to stop running, and one of whom was trying to figure out what it looked like to want something real. Getting it right in pieces, getting it wrong in places. Sitting with the imperfect, unresolved weight of two people who had found each other in an unlikely place and were still figuring out what to do about it. At some point around 3 a.m., she put her elbow on the counter and rested her chin on her hand and looked at him and said, "You know, you're nothing like I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Not this." She gestured vaguely at the whole of him. "Someone simpler, maybe." "Simpler's overrated." "Yeah." She almost smiled. "I'm starting to think so." He walked her to the back room at close to 4, the same walk he'd done 3 months ago on the night she'd arrived with fear in her eyes and a failing car. The couch was the same couch. The broken armrest, the space heater, the window looking out at the desert dark. She stood in the middle of the small room, her coat off finally, and looked around with an expression he could now read well enough to know was not displacement, but something like the very first, most tentative beginning of a feeling she was not going to name yet. "The deadbolt's on the inside, Vasa," he said from the doorway. "I know," she said. "I remember." "Good night, Lena." She looked at him. "Grant?" "Yeah." "Thank you." She said it differently than she had 3 months ago, not with the formal weight of someone receiving something they didn't expect, with something quieter, something that had the shape of "you matter," without using those words. He nodded once, pulled the door toward closed, and stood in the hallway for a moment with his hand still on the doorframe, listening to the sound of the deadbolt sliding home from the inside, thinking about a truck that had sat in a parking lot and then driven away, and a man named Marcus Vale who had money and patience and a very particular idea of ownership, and the fact that whatever was beginning in this cafe, cautiously, imperfectly, with no guarantees, was now in the same territory as something that was already dangerous. He went back to the counter, sat down, didn't try to sleep. Outside, the highway was empty and the sign hummed its incomplete name, and the desert stretched in all directions without apology, and Grant Calloway sat in the dark and thought about what it cost to protect something that mattered, and whether he was ready to pay it, and realized, somewhere around the time the first thin light began happening at the edge of the eastern sky, that the question of whether he was ready had already been answered, had been answered weeks ago maybe the first night. He just hadn't caught up to the answer yet. He was catching up now. The morning after, Grant found her note on the counter. Not the backroom counter, the main counter, the one where she always sat, third stool from the end. She'd torn a page from the small notepad Felix kept near the register and written in her careful, slightly cramped handwriting, "Coffee was good. Thank you for last night. L." He stood there reading it twice, then folded it and put it in the same jacket pocket where he kept the first one. He had both of them now, which was not something he'd planned or thought about, but there they were. Felix came in at 6, looked at the note in Grant's hand before he could pocket it, and said nothing, made coffee, started the morning prep. The cafe filled slowly with the particular kind of people who needed highway food before 7 a.m. Long-haul drivers, early shift workers from the county road maintenance crew, a pair of hunters heading north. Grant stayed through the morning rush, which was not something he usually did, and drove home at 9 to shower and get Sophie to her Saturday art class, and spent the afternoon doing the things that Saturday afternoons required. Grocery shopping, a load of laundry, a call with his CFO that he'd been putting off for 2 weeks, and finally took standing in his kitchen because he'd learned that movement helped him think, and thinking helped him tolerate quarterly projections. The CFO talked. Grant listened, made the right noises, Approve the revised forecast that was slightly worse than last quarter, but well within acceptable margins. Hung up and stood at the kitchen window looking at Sophie in the backyard, crouched over something in the dirt with the intense concentration of a person conducting field work, and thought about a woman sleeping on a broken-armed couch in a back room on the Arizona desert, and whether she'd woken up afraid or something slightly less than that. She came back 3 days later, Tuesday, which was her usual day. She came in at 11 and sat at the counter and looked, Grant thought, like someone who'd had a few days of internal argument and hadn't entirely resolved it. There were marks under her eyes that weren't just tiredness. She was wearing the dark green jacket again, which he'd come to think of as her better jacket, the one she wore when she was slightly more okay. "How are you?" he asked. "Functional," she said. He poured the coffee, sat down beside her, which was what he did now. "Has anything—" "No. Nothing." She wrapped her hands around the mug. "I've been watching. I drove past the lot twice before I came in tonight. Nothing out of the ordinary." He hadn't thought about that she'd done reconnaissance before entering, had driven past twice to check the lot. It hit him at a slight angle, the way her habits kept revealing themselves and kept costing him something to understand. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About the truck. About whether it was him or wasn't him, and whether I'll ever actually know, and whether not knowing is worse than knowing." She paused. "I've been doing this math in my head, like every place I've stopped, every place I've stayed, I've done this calculation. How long is safe? When the risk starts outweighing the stability, whether I've stayed too long." He kept his voice level. "And what does the math say?" She looked at him. "It says I've probably stayed in one motel for too long. It says someone who's looking hard enough with the resources Marcus has can backtrack through cash transactions and motel records and—" She stopped. "It's not an exact science, but the longer you stay still, the smaller the gap between you and whoever's following." "So you move," he said. Not a question, just naming the shape of it. "Usually." She held his gaze. "Usually I'd have been gone 2 weeks ago." The word usually sat between them with considerable weight. "But you're still here," he said. "I'm still here." She looked at her coffee. "Which is either smart or stupid, and I can't figure out which." Grant turned his cup slowly on the counter. He'd been thinking since the morning of the note, thinking with the particular focused quality he used for problems that required patience rather than speed, the kind of slow, deliberate thinking that his company's early investors had occasionally mistaken for hesitation and which had, more than once, turned out to be the thing that saved them from a bad decision. "What would you need," he said, "to feel safe enough to stop moving?" She blinked. "What?" "Not in the abstract, practically. What would need to be different for the math to change?" She opened her mouth and then closed it, like the question had arrived from a direction she hadn't anticipated. It's not that simple." "I know it's not simple. I'm asking anyway." She thought about it, genuinely, which he could see in the way her gaze went slightly unfocused while she worked through it. "I'd need to know he couldn't find me. Actually know, not just hope." She paused. The divorce wasn't clean. I left before the legal process was finished. He contested it, his lawyers slowed everything down, and then I left before the final decree. I'm still technically— It's complicated." "Are you legally free?" "Almost. I have a lawyer in Nashville, the only real expense I kept paying. She says the decree should have been finalized by now, but there's a filing issue Marcus's lawyer created, and it's been sitting in a Tennessee court for months. Until that's cleared, he has some legal standing to—" She made a gesture that encompassed the whole mess. "He uses it, not legitimately, but he uses the ambiguity." "What does your lawyer say about the filing issue?" "That it's fixable, that it should have been fixed already, but his lawyer keeps creating friction, and she doesn't have the resources to push back fast enough." Grant absorbed this. Okay. She looked at him. "It's not really a— Can I call her? Your lawyer." "What?" "Your lawyer in Nashville. Can I call her?" Lena stared at him. "Why would you call my lawyer?" "Because filing issues get resolved faster with the right kind of pressure," he said. "And I have a firm that handles my corporate litigation. They're very good, and they have people in Tennessee. If your lawyer needs backup to push Marcus's obstruction out of the way, I can provide that. She was quiet for a long moment. He could see the resistance forming, the same resistance that had come up with the couch on the first night, the Christmas thermos, every time he'd offered something. The I don't want to owe reflex, the don't make me a project reflex. The reflex of a woman who had learned that things offered by powerful men tended to come with terms that revealed themselves later. Lena, he said, I know what you're thinking. Do you? You're thinking this is how it starts. Someone with resources offers help, and then the help becomes leverage. Her jaw tightened. Is it? No. He said it without heat. I'm not Marcus Vale. I'm not interested in what I can get from helping you. I'm interested in you not having to run anymore. He paused. But I also can't prove that to you right now. You're going to have to make a judgment call about whether you believe me. She looked at him for a long, measuring moment. The cafe made its small sounds around them. Somewhere down the counter, a trucker pushed back his plate and reached for his check. I believe you, she said, quietly, like the decision had been harder than the sentence made it sound. Okay, he said, but I'm not giving you her number tonight. I need to think about it. That's fair. It might take me a few days. That's fine. She looked at him with the slightly exasperated expression she got when he refused to push back the way she was bracing for. You're very patient. I've been building things for 8 years, he said. You don't build things by rushing the foundation. She was quiet. Then, is that what this is? A building project? No, he said. It's a person I don't want to lose. She thought about it for 4 days. He knew because he counted, and he'd stopped pretending to himself that he didn't count. Tuesday night, she left without giving him the number. Wednesday, she didn't come. Thursday, she texted him. They'd exchanged numbers somewhere around December, practically, for cafe logistics that had never actually required them. A single message that said, still thinking. He wrote back, take your time, and meant it. Friday, she didn't come. Saturday morning, he was at his actual office downtown, in the glass and steel building that had his company's name on it and that he'd always found slightly unreal, sitting through a strategy meeting that he was technically leading, when his phone buzzed with a text that was just a Nashville phone number and a name. Karen Rice, Esquire. He excused himself, stepped into the hallway, and called his lead litigation attorney before the strategy meeting had finished without him. What happened over the next 72 hours was, from Lena's perspective, almost invisible. From Grant's perspective, it was a series of phone calls and one firm instruction. I need this cleared, I need it done right, and I need her name kept out of anything that touches the press. And then the particular machine of competent legal work running at the speed that adequate funding allowed. Karen Rice, who had been fighting a slow battle against Marcus Vale's obstruction with insufficient ammunition, received a call from a partner at a Phoenix litigation firm on a Monday morning. The partner was calm and specific. The obstruction strategy Marcus's lawyer had been using was procedurally thin and had been allowed to persist only because no one had pushed it hard enough. They pushed it. By Thursday of that week, a Tennessee family court judge had cleared the filing issue and issued the final divorce decree. Lena Brooks was legally free of Marcus Vale. Grant found out from Karen Rice on a Thursday afternoon. He sat at his desk in the glass building and read the summary his attorney had forwarded and felt something that wasn't quite triumph. Triumph was too loud for it, but was in the neighborhood, something quieter. The satisfaction of a problem solved and a person unburdened. He didn't call Lena. He waited for Thursday night. She came in at 11, which was her usual, and she sat at her stool and he put the coffee in front of her and waited. She looked at him. Karen called me today, she said. Yeah. She said it was done. Yeah. She looked at her coffee. He watched her absorb it, the reality of it, which was larger than a legal document, which was the end of a particular kind of exposure she'd been carrying for over a year, the removal of the legal ambiguity Marcus had been using to maintain a grip on a situation he had lost the right to any part of. How? She asked. How did they do it that fast? Karen's been trying to move that filing for 5 months. They filed a motion to compel and had the right judge look at it, he said. The obstruction was procedurally weak. It just needed someone to push. Someone with resources. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. He could see her working something out. Not the gratitude calculation, not the debt calculation, something more complicated than that. He's going to know, she said. Know what? That someone helped me. Someone with legal muscle. He's going to... When his lawyer calls him about this, Marcus is going to know I'm not alone anymore. That someone is... She stopped. It changes his calculation. Grant had thought about this. Does it make things more dangerous or less? I don't know. She looked at her hands. With Marcus, visibility is complicated. Part of what he's been able to do is because I've been invisible. No resources, no support, no one who'd notice. She paused. But he responds to power. He understands it. If he thinks someone powerful is involved, he might back off. Or he might escalate. She looked at Grant. He doesn't like losing. Neither do I, Grant said. She stared at him. It wasn't the statement itself. It was something about the way he said it, flatly, without performance, like a piece of information rather than a threat, like a man describing the weather. You don't know him, she said. No, but I know the type. You think you do. Men who control things through fear and attrition, Grant said. Men who use legal systems as harassment tools. I've dealt with corporate versions of that my entire career. He paused. Marcus Vail is a man with family money and a bruised ego. I'm not saying he isn't dangerous. I'm saying he isn't uniquely dangerous. She looked at him for a long moment. Something behind her eyes shifted. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to notice. You're not scared of him at all, are you? She said. Not accusatory, almost wondering. I'm concerned about what he might do to you, Grant said. That's real. But scared of him personally? No. She shook her head slowly, like she was cataloging something unexpected. Most people who know what Marcus can do... I'm not most people, Grant said. Not arrogantly. Just factually. She knew that. She'd known it for months. But there was something about hearing it in this context, applied to this specific threat, in this specific way, that landed differently than the general knowledge. She drank her coffee. They stayed in the relative quiet of a Tuesday turning Wednesday for a while, and at some point the conversation moved to other things, lighter things, because that was what they'd learned to do. Hold the heavy things and then set them down for a while, not to avoid them, but because you couldn't hold everything all the time without your hands giving out. She told him Sophie had sent her a photo through Grant, which had apparently happened the previous week. Sophie had demanded to take a photo of herself with Grant's phone and then instructed him to send it to the coffee lady because she'd heard him mention Lena and had developed an opinion about meeting her. She calls me the coffee lady? Lena said. She doesn't have another name for you. What did she say? In the message. She said, and I'm quoting directly, Hi, this is Sophie. I like your name and also my dad talks about you a lot. Lena laughed. A real laugh, the surprised kind. She did not. She absolutely did. I had no advance warning. She grabbed the phone. What did you say? I said, Sophie, please, and she said, what? It's true. Lena was still smiling. Not the almost smile, not the polite smile, the actual one, the one that reached her eyes and changed her whole face. She sounds like a menace. She is a complete menace, Grant said. She's also 7, and she weighs 48 pounds, and she has no idea how terrifying she is. They never do, Lena said. She said it warmly, with the particular quality of warmth she got when Sophie came up in conversation, which Grant had noticed and stored away carefully. Does she know anything about... She gestured at the general situation. Me. The situation. No, she knows I have a friend who comes to the cafe, that's all. Lena nodded. Good. A pause. I don't know if good is the right word. She'd like you, Grant said. She likes people who are direct. She'd probably think I'm weird. She thinks most adults are weird. She's not wrong about that. He turned his coffee cup. She has a way of just deciding about people within the first 5 minutes, and once she's decided, she's fairly committed to it. What would she decide about me? He looked at her. She'd probably like you immediately, and then demand to know why you don't have a dog. Lena laughed again. He collected it the way he'd learned to collect the real ones. quietly, without making a thing of it, but completely. Thoughts. The second week of February arrived cold and dry, which was Arizona's version of winter making a final point before giving up. Grant had been at the cafe on a Tuesday, and Lena had come and gone, and things between them had settled into a shape that was not comfortable exactly, because comfortable implied static, and nothing about their situation was static, but familiar, solid in the way that things become solid when they've been tested. And then, on a Thursday night, she walked in, and he knew immediately that something had changed. It wasn't the door scanning. She always scanned the room. It wasn't the jacket or the hands around the mug. It was something finer than that, a quality of containment that was different from her usual containment, tighter and more deliberate, like a person who'd received news and had been carrying it alone all day and had gotten very good at not showing it. He let her sit, let her have the coffee, waited. "He knows I'm in Arizona," she said. The sentence settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water. "How?" Grant asked. "I don't know exactly. Karen thinks... She thinks someone ran a search on my name after the divorce decree finalized. Property records, maybe. Or I had a prescription filled 2 months ago at a pharmacy in Mesa, under my name because I needed insurance, and I still had... It's a long story. The point is, there's a thread somewhere, and he followed it far enough to know the state." She paused. "His lawyer called Karen today, ostensibly about the decree. But the lawyer mentioned tracking down loose ends in a way that Karen said was not accidental." Grant's jaw tightened. That's a veiled threat through legal counsel. "Welcome to Marcus Vale's playbook." She said his name with the specific flatness of someone who had made themselves stop flinching at it. He doesn't threaten directly. He implies. He creates atmospheres. He lets you do the math yourself. "What does Karen recommend?" "She recommends I stay in a place he can't verify, use no cards or traceable names, and wait to see if he actually pursues anything legally." She paused. "Which he can't, now. The decree is final. He has no legal standing." "But he doesn't need legal standing to find you," Grant said. "No, he just needs someone with a car and patience." She looked at her coffee. "Like that truck." They sat with that for a moment. "So you're thinking about moving," Grant said. She didn't answer right away. He watched her, the stillness of her, the way she'd gotten very precise in the way she held herself. "I've been thinking about it for 4 days," she said. "Since before Karen called, since..." She stopped. "I drove past the motel yesterday, and I just sat in the car for a while, trying to figure out if I was being paranoid or if the feeling I had was real." "What feeling?" "That I've been somewhere too long." She looked at him. "I keep trying to talk myself out of it. I keep thinking about what's here. What I'd be leaving." The last part was said quietly, almost under her breath, like she hadn't entirely decided to say it. "But that's exactly how it went wrong last time. I waited too long to leave somewhere because of what I'd lose by leaving, and by the time I went, it was harder than it should have been. Harder because of Marcus? Yes, and because I'd let myself believe the situation was stable when it wasn't." She pressed her fingertips to the counter. "I'm scared of making the same mistake." "Staying too long?" "Yes." Grant looked at her. He thought about what he'd understood in the parking lot 3 weeks ago. The question of what it cost to protect something that mattered, the realization that the question had already been answered. He thought about the note in his jacket pocket, the first one and the second one, and about Sophie in the backyard crouched over something in the dirt, and about the particular empty room in his life that had made itself known in early November and had been getting louder ever since. "What if moving wasn't the only option?" he said. Lena looked at him. "What if instead of you disappearing again," he said, "we made it harder for him to come near you?" "How?" "Visibility," he said. "You said it. Marcus responds to power. He's been able to do what he's been doing because you've been operating alone, with nothing behind you, no resources, no connections, nothing that would cost him significantly to mess with." He paused. "What if that changed?" She was very still. "What are you suggesting?" I'm suggesting that a woman who is publicly connected to someone with legal resources and a certain amount of profile is a much less attractive target for a man like Marcus Vale than a woman traveling alone under a cash alias. Publicly connected, she repeated, and her voice had a careful quality. I'm not suggesting anything you're not comfortable with, he said. I'm not. This isn't a transaction. I'm not offering protection in exchange for something else. He held her gaze. I'm telling you that I don't want you to disappear, that I want to help you stay, and that the most practical thing I can think of is making sure Marcus Vale understands that you're not alone and haven't been for a while. She was quiet for a long moment. The cafe hummed around them. Someone at the far end of the counter asked Felix for a refill, and Felix took care of it with his usual wordless efficiency. You've thought about this, Lena said. For a few weeks? Yeah. And you think it's simple? No, he said. I think it's complicated, and I think it has risks, and I think it requires you to trust me more than you've trusted anyone in a while. He paused. I'm not pretending otherwise. She exhaled, looked at the counter, looked at him. I came here tonight to tell you I was leaving, she said. The sentence hit him somewhere behind the sternum. He kept his expression level, which cost something. I came to say goodbye, she continued. I had it planned. I had the car packed, not completely, but the important things. I was going to tell you it had been good and that that what you did mattered, and then I was going to drive north and figure it out somewhere else. She paused. I had it all planned. But, he said. She looked at him. But I've been planning escapes for 14 months, and this is the first time I've ever not wanted to follow through on one. He held her gaze. Let the sentence exist without filling the space around it. I don't know how to stay, she said. I mean that literally. I've been moving so long I've forgotten the mechanics of it. I don't know how to unpack in a place that's real. I don't know how to let someone... She stopped. Tried again. I don't know how to stop watching the door. You don't have to know all of it right now, Grant said. You just have to know whether you want to try. Her jaw worked. The thing she'd been containing all night was right at the surface now, not breaking through but visible, pressing against the inside of her control. I'm not a project, she said. The words came out harder than she probably intended, and she heard it, and her expression shifted. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... I know you're not a project, he said. You're a person I've been falling for since approximately November, who makes things harder and more interesting and more worth showing up for than anything else I've got going right now. He said it plainly, without decoration, because that was the only way it was going to land right with her. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. She looked at him for a long time. The cafe was very quiet. Felix had moved to the back. The highway outside was dark and empty. The Arizona night sat around the building in its cold, indifferent way, and the sign hummed its incomplete name, and somewhere down the road the desert spread out in every direction without end. I was really going to go, she said quietly. I know. Part of me is still... She looked toward the door, not with the threat-assessing scan, but with something more like the look of a person acknowledging a habit, recognizing it for what it is. Part of me is still calculating the distance to the highway. Yeah, he said. I know. That doesn't bother you. It bothers me, he said honestly. I'd be lying if I said it didn't, but it doesn't change anything. He paused. You've been wired for exit for 14 months. That doesn't disappear because you make a different decision. I'm not expecting you to be cured of it. She looked at the counter, at her hands, at him. What if I can't stop? She said. What if one day the feeling gets loud enough and what if I'm not built to stay? He considered the honest answer to that, which was uncomfortable and necessary. Then I'd rather know that after trying than spend the rest of my life wondering. Her eyes were bright in a way that wasn't quite tears. Close to them, but controlled, held back by the same discipline that held back everything. You make it sound reasonable. It is reasonable. It's not reasonable. But she said it without conviction, said it the way you argue with something you've already half accepted. He reached across the counter and put his hand over hers, not tightly, just resting there. She looked down at it, then up at him. Don't go, he said, quietly. Just that. She sat with it, The whole weight of the night, the packed car at the motel, the planned goodbye, the 14 months of motion, the truck in the parking lot, the divorce decree, the brother she hadn't spoken to, the kitchen in Nashville where she'd decided in the middle of the night that she would rather have nothing than keep having this. All of it sitting in the cafe with them, not resolved, not gone, but present and acknowledged and not, for once, the loudest thing in the room. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay," he said. "I'm not going." She looked down at his hand on hers, then didn't look away. "Tonight." "Tonight's enough," he said. She exhaled, slowly, like something had been held for a very long time and was being, very carefully, set down. "I still don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I," he said. "We'll figure it out." She looked at him. "That's not very reassuring." "No," he agreed, "but it's true." She didn't say anything else for a while, kept her hand under his. The cafe settled into its late-night rhythm, the refrigeration and the neon and the faint sound of Felix doing something methodical in the back. Outside, the highway waited empty, and the desert sat in its enormous dark, and neither of them was going anywhere. At least not tonight. And tonight, Grant had learned, was how things were built. Not in grand gestures or resolved futures or guarantees that nobody could actually make. In individual nights, chosen one at a time. In the decision to stay, made again and again, in the full knowledge that staying cost something and cost it every day and was worth it anyway. He refilled her coffee without being asked. She let him. That was enough. She didn't leave that night. She also didn't leave the next morning or the morning after that. What she did instead was drive back to the motel on Old Sunrise Road, sit in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine running and her hands on the wheel, and then go inside and unpack the things she'd packed. It wasn't a dramatic decision. That was the thing she hadn't expected, that staying would feel so quiet. She'd imagined, in the abstract, that some large threshold would be crossed, that there would be a moment of clear before and after. Instead, she just put her clothes back in the drawer and her books back on the nightstand and her thermos, Grant's thermos, the insulated one from Christmas, back on the bathroom shelf where she kept it, and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a while. She felt terrified. She also felt something else underneath the terror that she didn't have a clean word for. Something that wasn't peace exactly, because peace implied the absence of threat, and the threat was still very much present. Something more like the feeling of having made a decision with your whole self instead of just the part of yourself that was afraid, and finding that the rest of you was still standing after. She called Karen Rice the next morning. "I'm staying in Arizona," she said. Karen was quiet for a moment. "For how long?" "I don't know. A while," she paused. "I wanted you to know, in case Marcus's people are tracking my movements, and it looks like I've gone static. I don't want you to be surprised if something moves on his end." "Lena." Karen's voice had the particular quality it got when she was about to say something as a person rather than a lawyer. "Is there someone there? Someone you trust?" She thought about Grant sitting at the counter with his hand over hers. The plainness of "don't go." "Yes," she said, "there is." "Good," Karen said. "Just that." Grant's corporate attorney, a methodical man named Douglas Park, who had been with him since the second company's early days and who approached problems with the slow, systematic energy of someone diffusing something explosive, had spent the 2 weeks since Grant's phone call building a quiet but thorough picture of Marcus Vail. What he found was not surprising, but was useful. Marcus was exactly what Lena had described. A man of family money, real estate holdings primarily in Tennessee and Georgia, no criminal record, a reputation in Nashville legal circles as someone who used litigation the way other people used conversation. He had retained a private investigation firm out of Atlanta, a legitimate one, which somehow made it worse. And that firm had made inquiries in New Mexico and Texas that matched the timeline of Lena's moves. The Arizona thread was thinner. The pharmacy record in Mesa was a dead end. Marcus's people had found the state, but not a city, not a motel, not a name attached to a location. They were close, but not there. Douglas presented this to Grant on a Thursday morning in the glass building downtown, with the careful neutrality of someone delivering a medical diagnosis. Grant listened without interrupting, which Douglas appreciated. He has no legal recourse, Douglas said. The decree is final. Any attempt to locate her for non-legal purposes falls into harassment territory, potentially stalking under Arizona statute, depending on what actions he takes. What do you recommend? A letter, Douglas said, from this firm to his attorney of record in Nashville, noting that we are aware of the investigative activity, that our client is legally free and settled, and that any further contact or attempts at contact will be met with immediate legal action in both Tennessee as well as in Arizona. He paused. It won't stop a man like this permanently, but it changes his calculation. He spent 14 months following a woman with no resources. A woman with legal representation and a documented paper trail of his harassment is a different situation. Will he back off? Men like this usually do when the cost-benefit math changes, Douglas said. He's not irrational. He's just accustomed to operating without resistance. He looked at Grant over his glasses. We're providing resistance. Send the letter, Grant said. The letter went out the following Tuesday. Grant didn't tell Lena it was coming. He told her afterward, that Thursday at the cafe, and watched her face go through several things in quick succession. Surprise, something that might have been anger at not being consulted, and then something more complicated that eventually settled into a kind of exhausted relief. You should have told me first, she said. You're right, he said. I should have. She looked at him. I'm not a situation to be managed. I know. I'm sorry. I made a call I shouldn't have made without you. He held her gaze. It won't happen again. She absorbed that. He could see her deciding whether to let it rest there or push further, and making the choice to let it rest. Did his lawyer respond? She asked. Not yet. Douglas says give it 2 weeks. She nodded, drank her coffee. If he escalates, we document everything and we file, Grant said. Douglas knows exactly what statutes apply and exactly what threshold triggers them. Marcus Vail is not operating in a vacuum anymore. She was quiet for a moment. I've spent 14 months being the only person thinking about this, she said. It's strange to have someone else thinking about it. Strange good or strange bad? She considered it honestly. Strange disorienting, she said. I don't know yet if it's good. I keep waiting for the part where there's a condition. There's no condition. That's what someone with a condition would say. He almost smiled. Yeah, I know. He paused. I don't know how to prove a negative, Lena. I can only keep showing up the same way I've been showing up and let time do the work. She looked at him with the specific expression she had when she was acknowledging something she didn't entirely want to acknowledge. That's irritatingly reasonable, she said. I have my moments. Marcus Vail's attorney sent a response 10 days later. It was formal, slightly combative in tone, and carefully said nothing that could be used against his client, while making clear that Marcus considered the matter of his ex-wife's location to be a personal rather than legal concern. Douglas read it, identified 3 phrases that crossed into legally actionable territory depending on interpretation, and filed a notice with the Arizona court establishing the harassment documentation. Then he sent a second letter, shorter and less diplomatic than the first, that outlined exactly what would happen if any further investigative or contact activity was directed toward Lena Brooks in any state. After that, the silence from Nashville held. It wasn't the clean ending that movies gave you. The villain formally surrendering, the threat dissolving completely, the moment where you knew with certainty it was over. That wasn't how this worked, and both Grant and Lena knew it. Marcus Vail was not going to formally acknowledge defeat. He was going to recalculate the way men like him recalculated, and determine that the cost of continuing was now higher than whatever satisfaction pursuit gave him, and he was going to redirect his energy somewhere else without ever saying so. The silence was the answer. Not a guarantee, but a shift. Douglas said, in his measured way, that in his professional experience, this pattern of silence following documented legal pushback resolved permanently in roughly 80% of cases. The other 20% escalated, which was why documentation mattered and why vigilance was still warranted. Grant relayed this to Lena exactly as Douglas had said it, without softening the 20%. I know, she said. I've always known it might not be fully over. Does that change anything? She thought about it. No, she said. It doesn't. And that, Grant thought, was the most important thing she'd said in 5 months. Not that the danger was gone, it wasn't, not entirely, but that the incomplete resolution wasn't enough to make her run. She'd stopped making her decisions based on the worst possible version of what might happen and started making them based on what was actually in front of her. That was not a small thing. That was, in fact, everything. To see it. The first time Lena met Sophie was an accident. Grant had told himself he was going to manage that introduction carefully. Give it time, make sure Lena was ready, make sure Sophie was prepared, do the whole thing with appropriate parental deliberation. Sophie had other plans, as Sophie generally did. It was a Sunday in early March, warm enough that the desert had started its brief, startling annual green, the scrub picking up color after the winter rains. Grant had brought Sophie to the cafe on a whim. She'd been asking again ever since the conversation about the coffee lady, and he'd run out of reasons to say not yet. He had not coordinated this with Lena. He didn't know she'd be there. She was there. Sitting at her stool, third from the end, hands around a mug, Sunday afternoon light coming through the west windows and making the cafe look better than it usually did. She looked up when the door opened, did her automatic scan, and then went very still when she registered the small person beside Grant. Sophie was wearing her mismatched socks, one striped, one with dogs on it, and a purple jacket and an expression of intense curiosity directed at everything in the cafe simultaneously. She walked in like she owned the place, which she did not, but Sophie had the particular quality of children who hadn't yet learned to modulate their presence in spaces. She spotted Lena immediately. "Are you the coffee lady?" Sophie said. There was a beat of silence. Grant watched Lena's face do the thing it did when she was surprised. The slight widening of her eyes, the fraction of a second before the controlled expression reasserted itself. Except this time the controlled expression didn't fully reassert. Something warmer stayed. "I guess I am," Lena said. "I'm Sophie." She climbed onto the stool beside Lena with the confidence of someone twice her height. "My dad talks about you." "So I've heard," Lena said. She glanced at Grant, who was managing to appear calm while internally accepting that whatever plan he'd had was thoroughly off script. "He doesn't think I notice," Sophie said, "but I notice things." "What do you notice?" Lena asked. "He smiles different when he's going to the cafe." Sophie said it with complete seriousness, like a researcher presenting findings. Like a smaller smile. He doesn't know he does it, but he does. Lena looked at Grant. He looked at the ceiling briefly. "Sophie," he said. "What?" "It's true." It might be true and still be a private thing. Sophie appeared to consider this. "I don't think feelings are supposed to be private," she said. "Mrs. Reyes says you should say how you feel." "Mrs. Reyes is a wise woman," Lena said, "but your dad's also right that some feelings are for specific people in specific times." Sophie thought about this with the gravity it apparently deserved. Then she looked at Lena with the direct, evaluating stare she deployed when she was forming an opinion. "Do you like coffee a lot?" "I do." "I don't like coffee. I like hot chocolate." She paused. "Do you have hot chocolate?" "I can make you one," Lena said. And then, before Grant could say anything, she'd stood up and moved behind the counter. The work side, his side, with the natural ease of someone who'd spent time in commercial kitchens and knew her way around equipment and was running the steamer on the milk before Felix had even appeared to offer. Grant watched this happen. Watched his 7-year-old daughter sit at the counter and watch Lena work with the same focused attention she gave to things she'd decided were interesting. Watched Lena glance over at Sophie and say something he couldn't hear from where he was standing, and watched Sophie laugh. Her real laugh, the one that was too big for her face. He stood at the edge of the cafe and felt something shift in his chest. Not dramatically, just a quiet, tectonic thing. The way a room changes when the last piece of furniture is finally placed. After that, things moved in the way that things move when the main obstacles have been cleared, and what remains is the actual work of building something. Slower than the dramatic moments, less cinematic, and in many ways harder because it required consistency rather than courage. Lena moved out of the motel on Old Sunrise Road in late March. She'd been there 4 months, which was the longest she'd stayed anywhere in Arizona and longer than anywhere since Nashville. She didn't move into Grant's house. That was a conversation they'd had carefully, both of them clear-eyed about the fact that Sophie was 7 and things needed to move at the pace of a 7-year-old's understanding, not the pace of 2 adults who had already lost enough time to circumstances. She found an apartment in Tempe, a 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor of a building with a courtyard and good light, and a landlord who ran a cash option for the first month while her banking situation got properly established. Grant's attorney helped with the banking, a straightforward process once the legal ambiguity of her marriage was fully cleared, but one that required someone who knew which forms to file in which order. She had an address. Her name was on a lease. She had a bank account and a debit card and a phone plan under her own name for the first time in 14 months. These are not things that sound like freedom, listed out, but they were. They were exactly that. She told Grant about the debit card on a Tuesday night, pulling it out of her wallet and looking at it with the particular expression of someone handling something that means more than it looks like it means. Her name, embossed on the card. Lena Brooks. Present tense, permanent, attached to a number and an account that was hers and only hers. I cried a little when it arrived, she said. Yeah? In the apartment, by myself. She put the card back. That probably sounds ridiculous. It doesn't, he said. It sounds like exactly what it was. She called Cal in April. She'd been working up to it for weeks. Grant knew because she'd mentioned it twice, and then not mentioned it, and then mentioned it again, orbiting the decision without landing on it. Her brother. 2 years of silence, constructed partly by Marcus's influence and partly by Lena's own complicated feelings about having let the distance grow, about what it meant to have needed someone and been unavailable to herself in a way that made reaching out feel impossible. She called him on a Sunday afternoon from her apartment. She told Grant about it Tuesday. How did it go? He asked. She wrapped her hands around her mug, the familiar gesture. He answered on the second ring, she said, like he'd been waiting. She paused. He didn't ask where I'd been. He said, "Hey, Lena," like I'd called him last week. That sounds like someone who loves you, Grant said. Yeah. Her voice was slightly unsteady on the word. He's got a kid now, a baby, 8 months old, a girl. She was quiet for a moment. I missed a pregnancy and a birth and 8 months of a baby I didn't know existed. You know now, Grant said. I know now. She exhaled. He sent me photos, about 40 of them, all at once, the moment I texted him my new number, like he'd been waiting to send them. She shook her head slowly, but not with sadness, with something more complicated than sadness, something that had grief in it, and also relief, and also the specific ache of time that can't be recovered but can be built around. Her name is May. Good name. It is. She almost smiled. He asked when I was coming to see them, not if, when. She looked at Grant. He just assumed I was coming. Are you? Yeah, she said. I think I am. Cal lived in Knoxville. It was the first time she'd considered going east since she'd left, and she was quiet about it for a moment, and Grant recognized the particular quality of that quiet. Not fear exactly, but the presence of an old habit checking itself against a new circumstance. The wired for exit reflex, encountering a reason to go somewhere instead of away from something. I could come with you, Grant said, if you wanted. She looked at him. I can work from anywhere for a few days, he said. Sophie's spring break is in 3 weeks. Mrs. Reyes could take her for a long weekend. He kept his voice level, not pushing, just offering. We don't have to. I don't think you should have to walk back into Tennessee for the first time alone. She looked at him for a long moment. You'd do that? Yeah. Leave your company and your routines and drive to Tennessee with me. Fly, he said. I'm not doing that drive. She laughed. The surprised kind. Grant. What? I don't know what to do with you, she said. Not the same way she'd said it in December, in the back hallway next to the paper towels. Different now, softer around the edges. Less like a warning and more like an admission. You could let me come to Tennessee, he said. She looked at the counter, at him. Okay, she said. They flew to Knoxville on a Thursday in late April. Sophie was at Mrs. Reyes for the long weekend and had extracted a promise of a full report and photographs, particularly of the baby, because Sophie had opinions about babies that she'd been developing in real time since learning of May's existence and wanted documentation. The flight was 2 hours. Lena sat with her hands in her lap for the first 40 minutes and looked out the window at the country passing below them and didn't say much. Grant read his emails and let her be quiet. Somewhere over New Mexico, she reached over without looking at him and put her hand over his on the armrest, and he turned his hand over so their palms were together, and they stayed that way until the descent began. Cal lived in a small house in a neighborhood east of downtown Knoxville, the kind of neighborhood that had old trees and narrow streets and houses that had been the same since the 1970s, except for the satellite dishes. He was 34, shorter than Lena, with the same dark eyes, and he was standing on the porch when they pulled up in the rental car, with May on his hip and his wife Dara beside him, and he watched Lena get out of the car and didn't move, just waited. And when she got to the porch steps, he wrapped his free arm around her and held on for a long time. Grant stood by the car and gave them the moment. May, unconcerned by adult emotion, grabbed a fistful of Cal's shirt and watched Grant with the frank stare of an 8-month-old conducting her own assessment. He stayed 2 steps back the whole weekend, which was where he should be. This was Lena's trip, Lena's reunion, Lena's family doing the complicated work of knitting itself back together after 2 years of damage caused by a man none of them had invited into their lives. Grant ate the food Dara cooked and held May when she was passed to him, and talked with Cal about Tennessee football and the logistics software industry, and raising kids without enough sleep. And none of it was about Marcus or the past 2 years or anything that required careful navigation, because sometimes what families need first is the simple proof that ordinary conversation is still possible. On the second night, after Dara had taken May to bed and Cal had gone to find more beer, Lena and Grant sat on the back porch in the Knoxville April dark, which was soft and humid and full of insect sound, nothing like Arizona. "This feels weird," Lena said. "Good weird or bad weird?" "Good, I think." She looked at the backyard, at Cal's small vegetable garden that was just starting to come up. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong." "Nothing's going wrong," Grant said. "I know, that's the weird part." She pulled her cardigan tighter. "I've been in crisis mode for so long that normal feels like a trick." He understood that. He'd thought about it a lot over the past months, about what it did to a person to live at sustained high alert. Not just the exhaustion, but the way it rewired your relationship to calm, made calm feel like the quiet before something bad rather than just quiet. It wasn't something that resolved in weeks or months. It was something you had to slowly teach your nervous system to trust, one ordinary, uneventful day at a time. "It's not a trick," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm working on believing that." Cal came back with the beer, sat down across from them, cracked one open, looked at the two of them with the particular look of a brother who has just spent 2 days watching his sister with someone and has formed a strong opinion. "So," Cal said to Grant. "A cafe." "Yeah," Grant said. "You own a cafe on a highway in the middle of nowhere and you work there yourself and didn't tell anyone." "That's accurate." Cal looked at Lena. "This is a weird guy." "I know," Lena said. "I like him," Cal said. He said it directly, the way Lena said things when she'd decided to say them without softening. "I'm just saying, he's weird." "Thank you," Grant said. "I'm serious about the weird part." "I know, I appreciate the like part." Cal drank his beer, looked at Lena with the particular seriousness that family members sometimes have when they've been worried about someone for a long time and are seeing them differently and trying to calibrate. "You okay?" he said to her. "Not generally, specifically." She held his gaze. "Getting there," she said. He nodded once. It wasn't a small nod. It was the nod of someone accepting a true answer when they'd been worried they'd get a polished one. They sat on the porch until late, the 3 of them, in the soft Tennessee dark, and nobody solved anything or resolved anything or made any large declarations. They just talked, and the talking was its own kind of answer. Back in Arizona the following week, things had the quality of after the legal resolution, after the silence from Nashville, after Tennessee, after all the major obstacles had been navigated. What remained was the daily work of a life, which is less dramatic than everything that precedes it, and also, it turns out, the whole point. Lena started working. She'd been making quiet inquiries for weeks. She was good at administrative work, she knew it, and the Tempe area had no shortage of businesses that needed someone organized and detail-oriented and capable of constructing systems that hadn't existed before. She found a position at a small medical practice, 3 days a week, through a staffing agency that didn't require her to explain the gap in her resume in more detail than personal circumstances, now resolved. The office manager was a practical woman named Geraldine, who cared primarily about whether things got done and secondarily about everything else, and Lena and Geraldine understood each other within about 40 minutes of the first day. She came to the cafe on a Thursday after her second week of work and sat at her stool and said, unprompted, "I forgot how much I liked being useful." "How is it?" Grant asked. "Chaotic. Their record system is a disaster. Someone was using 4 different spreadsheets to track the same patient information and none of them matched." She looked almost pleased about this. "I've been reorganizing it all week." "Of course you have." "Don't say it like that." "Like what?" "Like it's charming." "Isn't it?" She looked at him with the exasperated expression she'd been directing at him since roughly November. "You're very annoying," she said. "You've mentioned," he said. Felix, at the far end of the counter, made a sound that he immediately converted into a cough when Grant looked at him. Sophie met Lena properly. As opposed to the counter encounter in March, which Sophie considered a preliminary, on a Saturday in May when Grant brought her to the cafe for lunch, and Lena was already there and made no attempt to leave, which Sophie interpreted correctly as a signal. She sat beside Lena and ate her grilled cheese and asked Lena 37 questions in the course of an hour, which Grant counted because he'd learned to count things that mattered. Questions included, did she have a dog? No. Did she want a dog? Maybe. What was her favorite color? She said she didn't really have one. Sophie accepted this with surprising equanimity. Had she ever been on a horse? Once, briefly, it didn't go well. Did she know how to make tamales? She thought so. It had been a while. What was her apartment like? Small, but with good light. Did she like Arizona? She said she was starting to. And the one that made Grant set down his coffee very carefully, did she like her dad? Lena looked at Sophie. Sophie looked back with the direct, unguarded stare of someone for whom this was an ordinary question. "Yeah," Lena said. "I do." "Good," Sophie said, and went back to her grilled cheese like the matter was settled, which apparently it was. Grant looked at the counter. Lena looked at him. Something passed between them that didn't need words. Not because words were unnecessary, but because some things have been said enough times in enough different ways that a look carries the full weight of all of them. On a Wednesday evening in early June, Grant drove out to the cafe alone. Not for any particular reason. Not because something had happened or because Lena was there. He just drove out on the highway with the June heat still holding in the early evening and the sky doing the thing it did at that hour. Going gold, and then orange, and then a specific shade of dark rose that you only saw over the desert, that had no equivalent anywhere else he'd been. He parked and sat in the car for a minute before going in. He thought about the night Lena had pulled in. The tires, the wrong angle, the eyes scanning the dark. Thought about the first note she'd left, the second. The couch with the broken armrest. The conversation in the back hallway next to the paper towels. The night she'd kissed him, and then the headlights had swept across the window. The morning she'd unpacked the bags she'd packed. The Knoxville porch and Cal's straightforward, "I like him." Sophie's 37 questions and her matter-of-fact good. He thought about what the past 7 months had actually been, underneath the story of it. Not a romance exactly, not in the clean-edged way romances were supposed to work. Something messier and more specific. A woman who'd been dismantled piece by piece, learning to trust that reassembly was possible. A man who had built everything around himself and his daughter, finally admitting that the structure had a missing wall. 2 people who had found each other in a cafe that barely had a name and had, through a combination of stubbornness and patience and the occasional terrible decision and the willingness to stay in the room when staying was hard, built something that didn't have a category. Not a rescue story. Lena had rescued herself, mostly. Had done the hard math of leaving, had kept herself moving, had gotten out. He'd provided resources and a place to land. But she'd done the leaving. That was hers. Not a simple love story either. Too much weight, too much history. Too many nights when it could have gone the other way. When the truck in the parking lot, or the packed bag, or the old fear of staying could have won. Just a story about two people choosing each other, imperfectly, one night at a time. Which was, he'd come to understand, the only way it actually happened for anyone, regardless of what they told themselves about grand gestures and definitive moments. He got out of the car. The evening air was warm and very still. The sign hummed over the door. Desert Mile Calf. And he stood there and looked at it for a moment and thought, not for the first time, about getting the E replaced. He was still thinking about it when he heard a car pull into the lot. The Nissan. Running well now, Dale in Wickenburg having done another round of work on it in March, the car finally operating the way a car was supposed to operate. Lena hadn't replaced it. She said she would eventually, when she was ready, but for now it was hers and she knew its sounds, and that counted for something. She got out and looked at him across the parking lot in the early evening light. "What are you doing here on a Wednesday?" she said. "Just driving." "You don't just drive." "Sometimes I do." She walked over, stood beside him, looking up at the sign the way she sometimes looked at things, fully, like she was actually seeing them rather than glancing past them. "You should fix the E," she said. "I've been thinking about it." "It's been broken for how long?" "Since before I bought the place." She looked at him. "So you just left it?" "It grew on me." She shook her head. "You're very strange." "Cal said the same thing." "Cal's right." She looked at the sign again. "Fix the E," she said. "It's your place. It should say what it is." He looked at her in the evening light, this woman who had arrived at 1:47 in the morning with fear in her eyes and nowhere to go, who had taken a couch from a stranger and paid for Dale's work at full price, and come back because the coffee was better than she'd expected, and stayed because, he thought, some part of her had recognized what was being offered, even before she could fully accept it. Who had unpacked her bags? Who had an apartment with good light and a debit card with her name on it and a job reorganizing disaster spreadsheets? Who had called her brother and held her niece and sat on a Tennessee porch drinking beer in the April dark? Who still sometimes scanned the room before sitting down? Who still occasionally reached for her jacket in the preparatory way? Who was still in the slow process of teaching her nervous system that rest was allowed? And who was doing it anyway, every day, the hard ordinary work of choosing a life over the familiar shape of running? "Okay," he said. "Okay, what?" "I'll fix the E." She looked at him with the expression that had started as wariness and become something that still had wariness in it, layered now with other things, with the months they'd accumulated, with the small ordinary history of two people who had not been easy on each other and had stayed anyway. "Good," she said. He held the door open. She walked in. Felix looked up from behind the counter, looked at the two of them, and said with the mild tone of a man confirming something he's known for 7 months, "The usual?" "The usual," they said in accidental unison, and looked at each other, and Lena laughed. The surprised kind, the real kind, the kind that still occasionally caught him off guard with how much light it had in it. They sat at the counter. Third stool from the end for her, second for him. Coffee appeared. The June evening settled into the particular quality of warmth that Arizona evenings had. Dry and faintly electric, the sky outside the window going from rose to deep blue to the first dark. No trucks in the parking lot. No headlights from the wrong angle. Just a highway cafe with a missing letter on its sign, and a man who had spent years building things finally understanding what he'd been building toward, and a woman who had spent 14 months running learning, one deliberate Tuesday night at a time, what it felt like to arrive. They didn't talk about the future. Not that night. The future was there, visible in the shape of things. Sophie's questions, Cal's approval, the debit card and the apartment and the job and the slow accumulation of ordinary days that were starting to feel, for both of them, like enough, like more than enough. But they didn't talk about it. They just drank their coffee in the evening quiet of a cafe in the Arizona desert, two imperfect, banged-up people who had found each other in the most unlikely of places and who had learned, the hard way, the only way that actually sticks, that the thing you're building toward isn't always what you planned. Sometimes it's better than what you planned. Sometimes it's a woman pulling into a parking lot at 1:47 in the morning and a man who decides on instinct to hold the door open and everything that comes after.